Welcome to Harry's Cosmos. Today's adventure: what if Harry was Sirius Black's secret son and Hermione his bonded heir? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The Secret Son. The pain woke Harry Potter before the dawn did, and it woke him from the inside. It began under the breastbone, a cold so deep it had no temperature, the way the dark beyond a window has no color. He sat up in the smallest bedroom of number 4 Privet Drive with both hands pressed to his chest, and felt something move in his blood that had no business moving, a current, a tide, a slow and enormous turning, as though far down beneath the floor of him a door had been pushed and had begun, after a very long time, to give. He did not cry out. He had learned in this house not to. He sat in the gray light with his heart going hard and strange and waited for it to pass, the way the headaches from his scar passed, the way everything passed if you were patient and quiet and gave the Dursleys nothing to punish. It did not pass, it spread. The cold ran out from his chest into his arms, and where it went the skin of his forearms prickled and rose, and Harry turned his hands over in the half-light and watched, with a calm that frightened him more than panic would have, a line of writing surface on the inside of his left wrist. It came up out of the skin the way frost comes up on a pane, not drawn, not cut, but admitted, as if it had been there all his life under a thin warm cover, and the cover had finally worn through. The letters were silver dark and very old. They were not English, but he found, looking at them, that he could read them anyway, the meaning rising in him at the same moment the shapes did. The line is dying, the blood remembers, come. Then the words sank back beneath the skin, and the cold drew in to a single hard point behind his ribs, and Harry was left sitting alone in the dark of a stranger's house with his arms bare and his heart pounding in the absolute certainty, lodged in him now like a splinter of star glass, that something that had been hidden in him since before he could remember had just woken up and begun to call. He got Hedwig's cage open with shaking hands and wrote 2 lines to the only person in the world who would not tell him he had dreamed it. Hermione Granger read the note 3 times on the front step of her parents' house in Hampstead, and by the 3rd reading she had stopped being frightened and started being furious, which was, for Hermione, very nearly the same thing as being afraid, only useful. Something woke in me this morning. Writing came up in my skin and called my blood. I'm not making it up. I don't know what it is, and I don't know who to ask. She wrote back at once in the small, fierce hand she used for things that mattered, and she did not waste a word of it on telling him to stay calm, because she knew Harry, and Harry was calm. That was the trouble with him. He could be calm straight through the floor of a disaster while it swallowed him. Tell me exactly what the words said, she wrote. Exactly. Don't paraphrase, and don't let your aunt see your arms. I'm coming to get you. She did not tell her parents the whole of it. She told them a friend was in trouble and that she would be back, and her mother looked at her over the breakfast things with the particular helpless love of a person who has watched her daughter walk into a world she cannot follow her into, and let her go. Hermione had 3 years of practice now at being 2 girls, the dentist's daughter in the clean, bright house, and the witch who had walked into a cellar full of poisons and reasoned her way out, who had brewed a forbidden potion at 12, who had stood between her friends and a grown wizard with murder in him, and not run. She put the second girl on like a coat and took the underground to Surrey and arrived at number 4, Privet Drive, at 10:15 with a library book in her bag whose true cover was hidden under a false one, and knocked on the door of the most ordinary house she had ever seen. Harry answered it himself. The Dursleys had gone out, a thing about Dudley and a boxing trophy, and the house behind him was so aggressively clean and so completely empty of him that Hermione understood, in the first second, more about Harry Potter's summers than he had ever told her. "Show me," she said. He pushed up his sleeve. There was nothing on the skin now, only the old thin scar where Dudley's friends had once shut a window on his wrist, and for a moment Hermione's certainty wavered, and then Harry pressed 2 fingers to the place, and the cold came up under them at his touch, and the silver-dark writing surfaced again like breath on glass, and Hermione Granger stopped breathing. "That's not a hex," she said. Her voice had gone very precise. "Hexes don't read. That's writing that knows what it means. That's an inheritance." She looked up at him, and her eyes had the bright, hard focus he had learned to trust above almost anything in the world. "Harry, has anything like this ever happened before? Anything at all? On a birthday, or—" "No." He pulled the sleeve down. "Never. It started this morning. It said the line is dying. The blood remembers. Come." "The line is dying," Hermione repeated, and he watched her take the words and turn them over the way she turned a difficult passage in a book, looking for the place where it would give. "Whose line? Not the Potter's. There's no Potter line to die. You're the last of it, and you're 13 and perfectly alive, so a line that includes you isn't dying, it's just small." She had begun to pace the spotless hall, and the false-covered book was out of her bag and open in her hands, though she had not looked down at it once. "And blood that remembers. Blood doesn't remember anything. Blood is blood, unless someone made it remember, unless someone put something in it on purpose and set it to wake." Set it to wake when, Harry said slowly. When the line is dying. They looked at each other across the Dursleys' clean hall, and the same thought arrived in both of them at the same moment, because they had spent 3 years learning to think in the same direction, and it was the kind of thought that changes a life. There's a black line dying, Hermione said quietly. Right now, in the papers, on every wireless, there's one black left who isn't dead or married out, and he's in the worst prison in the world, and the whole country thinks he's about to be kissed. She closed the book. Harry, the man who broke out of Azkaban, the one the Ministry says is coming for you. Sirius Black, Harry said. The name dropped into the hall and lay there. And under Harry's breastbone the cold turned over once, slow and enormous, like a thing answering to a sound it had waited its whole life to hear. They did not go to Diagon Alley by flu, because Hermione pointed out, with the relentless practicality that was the other half of her brilliance, that a 13-year-old boy the entire Ministry believed to be a murderer's target should not stick his head in a public fire and announce his destination. They went the way Muggles went, by train and on foot, Harry under a borrowed cap with his fringe pulled down over the scar, and they came up the crooked length of Diagon Alley in the late morning crowd, 2 children among the cauldrons and the owls, and they went to the one place in the wizarding world that did not care whether you were a child or a murderer's target or a name in the papers, but cared only what your blood would prove. Gringotts received them the way the bank received everyone, without warmth and without doubt. The goblin at the high counter did not look up from his ledger when Hermione said they wished to make an inheritance inquiry. He looked up when she laid on the marble counter a single galleon and a folded slip on which she had written, in the careful block letters of someone who had read a very great deal about goblins and respected exactly what the book said to respect, "We do not ask to keep what is not ours. We ask only to be told the truth our blood already holds." The goblin read it twice. Then he looked at Harry for the first time, and something happened in his ancient seamed face that was not quite surprise. Goblins did not permit themselves surprise, but was its first cousin. "The boy will come," the goblin said. "The girl will wait." "The girl," said Hermione in a tone Harry had heard her use exactly twice before, both times immediately preceding someone discovering they had badly misjudged her, "will come because the boy does not read gobbledygook, does not know the law of blood debt, and will sign whatever you put in front of him out of politeness, and I will not. You may charge us double for the second chair." There was a silence at the counter. And then the goblin did a thing goblins did perhaps once in a generation for a witch or wizard, and least of all for a muggle-born child. He inclined his head a fraction of an inch, the bow of one bargainer acknowledging that another has not wasted his time. "2 chairs," he said. "Follow." The chamber they were taken to was deep below the marble, a round room of unworked stone with a single basin at its center, and the basin was carved from black stone and held a still clear liquid that was not water. An old goblin waited beside it, older than the one above, his eyes the color of old coins, and on the rim of the basin lay a blade so thin it seemed less an object than the idea of an edge. 3 drops, the old goblin said, no more. "The blood of the living tells more truth than the living wish to hear. You may stop at any drop, most do." Harry looked at Hermione. She did not tell him what to do. That was the thing about Hermione that he had never been able to put into words and had stopped trying to, that at the moments that mattered she stopped pushing and simply stood where he could see her, so that whatever he chose he would not be choosing it alone. He took the blade. It did not hurt. He turned his hand over the basin, and 3 drops of his blood fell into the clear liquid and bloomed. The first drop spread and held its shape, a slow red flower, and over the basin in letters of light there rose a name Harry had read on a gravestone in a churchyard he had never been allowed to visit: James F. Potter. And beneath it, threading down, of the line of Potter, of the line of Peveril, holder of, and a list of names and seats and the ordinary furniture of an old wizarding family, the inheritance Harry had always half known was his and never been able to touch. "There," said Hermione softly, and Harry heard the relief in it, the wish for it to be only this. "That's your father, that's all it is, James Potter." The second drop fell. It did not bloom like the first, it sank. It went down through the clear liquid to the very bottom of the black basin and lay there dark, and the liquid above it began, very slowly, to turn not red, but the deep starless black of the writing that had surfaced in Harry's skin, the black that drank light, and out of that black a second name began to rise, and it rose the way a drowned thing rises, slow and reluctant and terrible, and the old goblin drew in a breath through his teeth. Because in 400 years at that basin he had seen this perhaps twice, the basin showing 2 fathers where blood should show one. The name that rose was not James Potter. Lily Jevans, it read first, the mother, blooming red and bright and good, and Harry's throat closed on it because he had her eyes. Everyone said he had her eyes, and there she was written in his own blood, true and unbreakable. And then beneath her name, in the black that had sunk to the bottom and was now rising to claim its place, the father's name reformed, and it was not the man on the gravestone, and it was not a man Harry had ever been allowed to think of as anything but a monster. Sirius Orion Black. The chamber went very quiet. The black writing held over the basin, steady now, no longer rising, simply true, and around the father's name there unspooled the rest of it the way the Potter inheritance had unspooled, of the most ancient and noble house of Black, heir of the blood, last of the direct line, and a thing Harry did not understand, a phrase in the old silver-dark hand, concealed under the right of sanguine Fidelius by the will of three. That he would understand later and would spend the rest of his life being unable to forget. He heard Hermione say his name. He did not answer it. He was looking at two names written in his own blood, a man on a gravestone who had died for him and a man in a sea prison the world wanted dead, and he understood, with the cold turning over and over now under his breastbone like a key finding its lock, that the call in his skin that morning had not been a stranger's. It had been his own blood waking because the only Black left alive to hold the line was dying in the dark, and the line had reached past its own death and found him. "Don't," said the old goblin sharply, because Harry's hand had moved over the basin again. "The third drop shows the cost, not the truth. You have the truth. Most are not strong enough to want the cost." Harry let the third drop fall. What the third drop showed them, it did not show in names. Black liquid rose up out of the basin in a thin cold column, and at its top it opened, the way the writing had opened in Harry's skin, into meaning, and the meaning poured into both of them at once, because Hermione had her hand on Harry's shoulder and the blood magic did not distinguish in that moment between the one whose blood it was and the one who would not let him stand in it alone. They were shown a night 13 years gone, a war at its blackest, a cottage in Godric's Hollow with the lamps low. They were shown James Potter, and Harry's breath broke on the sight of him, alive, laughing, young, a man and not a gravestone, sitting at a kitchen table with his head in his hands, while Lily stood at the window with her arms wrapped around herself, and a third man leaned against the dresser with his arms folded and his face wrecked, black-haired, gray-eyed. Younger than Harry had ever imagined him, and not mad and not cruel, only frightened in the particular way of a man being asked for something he is terrified to give. They were shown, not in words but in the shape of the thing, what the war had done to James Potter. A curse taken in a duel 2 years before, a dark and clever curse called the Withering that had not killed him and had taken from him the one thing it was built to take, the line. James Potter would have no son of his blood. The Potters would end with him, and in a war where the old families were being hunted to extinction, where Voldemort kept a tally of the bloodlines he meant to break, the ending of the Potters was not only a grief. It was a strategic fact. It was a door the enemy meant to close. And they were shown the thing the three of them had decided, in the low lamplight, with the war pressing on the windows, a thing so far outside the ordinary furniture of the world that Hermione's grip tightened on Harry's shoulder hard enough to bruise. That James Potter, who could not father the heir his name and the war required, had turned to the one man on earth he trusted as he trusted his own right hand, his brother in all but blood, the man who had stood at his wedding, the man who would stand as godfather to any child born, and had asked him. And that Lily, who loved her husband past the edge of the world and would die for the son she carried, had agreed, not lightly, never lightly, but with the clear, terrible courage that Harry would recognize, when he was older, as the same courage that had stood between him and a killing curse. And that Sirius, black, proud, reckless, 21 years old and the runaway heir of the very house whose blood the enemy prized above all others, had given them what they asked and given it weeping, and then done the thing that broke him and saved Harry both at once. He had let them take it from him. The rite was called the sanguine Fidelius, and it was older and darker than the charm that would later hide the cottage. It did not hide a house. It hid a fact, the fact of the father, and it hid it not only from the world but from the man himself, so that no curse, no veritaserum, no legilimens, no torture in any cell of any prison could ever draw from Sirius Black the truth that the Black heir lived, because Sirius Black himself would not be permitted to be sure of it. James Potter would be the boy's father in every magic that could be read, in name and in blood claim and in the love that raised him. The truth would sleep in the child's blood under lock, and the only key was the dying of the line, the day the last Black who could hold the family fell, and the blood, with nowhere left to go, woke to find its true heir and call him home. They had done it to protect him. That was the last thing the blood showed them, and it showed it gently, the way you tell a child a hard thing kindly. They had done it so that the most hunted bloodline in Britain would walk into the world wearing another name. They had done it so that the boy would have a father who could love him in the daylight, and a true father who would die before he let the secret slip and the hunters come. They had not known, none of them had known, that within the year James and Lily would be dead, and Sirius would be in Azkaban for their murder, sealed away from the one truth that might have saved his mind, unable even to be certain of the son he had given them, because the rite had taken his certainty along with everything else. The column of black liquid sank back into the basin. The chamber was only a chamber again, cold stone and a black bowl and an old goblin watching them with his coin-colored eyes. Harry found that he was sitting in the second chair after all, though he did not remember sitting down, and that Hermione was kneeling in front of him with both his hands in both of hers, and that his face was wet. He didn't betray them, Harry said. His voice came out of him very small and very steady, the smallness of a thing too large to be said any other way. Hermione, Sirius Black didn't betray my parents. He's my father. He's my father, and they put him in Azkaban for killing my mother and the man who raised me, his best friend, and he's been there for 12 years, and he can't even be sure I exist because they made him not sure to keep me safe. I know, Hermione said. She did not tell him to breathe. She did not tell him it would be all right. She held his hands and she let it be as enormous as it was, and that, Harry thought distantly, was the bravest thing anyone had done for him in a long time, braver than soothing to simply stand inside the size of it with him. I know, I heard it too, and everyone thinks he's coming to kill me. A terrible laugh tore out of him, half a sob. The whole country, they've got Dementors at the school looking for him. They think he wants me dead, and he's Hermione. He broke out of Azkaban. Nobody breaks out of Azkaban. He broke out and he's coming, and they all think it's to finish me off, and what if it's not? Then we find him first, Hermione said. Harry stopped. She had not raised her voice. She had said it the way she said a sum was correct, the way she said a charm was Latin for a thing, with the flat certainty that arrived in her after she had reasoned all the way down and reached the floor of the matter. And looking at her kneeling on the cold goblin stone in her sensible coat with her wild hair coming out of its plait and her jaw set, Harry felt the worst of the cold under his breastbone ease, not because the fear had gone, but because he was, for the first time in his life, not facing the largest fact of his existence by himself. They'll never believe us, he said. A boy and they'll never believe two 13-year-olds over the ministry. No, Hermione agreed. They won't believe us. So we won't ask them to believe us, we'll make them prove themselves wrong. She stood and pulled him up with her and turned to the old goblin who had watched the whole of it without expression and now waited to see what the children would do with the truth they had been strong enough to want. I need to know, Hermione said to him, what this blood entitles him to, not the money, the law. If Harry is the son of Sirius Black, and Sirius Black is the last of the direct line of the House of Black, what is Harry in law? The goblin's coin-colored eyes moved from her to Harry and back. In law, he said, the boy is the heir presumptive of the most ancient and noble House of Black, the only living issue of the only living son of the senior line. A pause. In law, the boy is worth more than any other child in Wizarding Britain, and more dangerous to a dozen of its houses, and you have just had it written in a basin that goblins keep but do not own, which means by sundown it will be a fact the Goblin Nation knows, and what the Goblin Nation knows it does not sell, but neither does it forget. He folded his hands. You asked only for the truth, you have it. The cost was the third drop, and you have paid it. But there's a thing the truth does not tell you, girl, that you would be a fool not to ask. Ask it for me then, said Hermione, who was never too proud to be taught. The line is dying, the goblin said. You heard the call yourself in the boy's skin. The blood woke because the last holder of the seat is failing in a cell in the dark with the Dementors at his soul. The black magic has reached past him to its heir because it believes it must. But a house that old does not pass its whole weight onto a child of 13 and trust the child to bear it. There is an older provision. The blood, when it wakes an heir too young or too alone to hold the house, reaches further still and it seeks an anchor. A second will already bound to the heir's own to share the weight the seat would otherwise break him under. The goblin looked, for the first time, directly and only at Hermione, and his ancient face was unreadable. When the boy's blood woke this morning, girl, did nothing waken you? Hermione opened her mouth to say no, and stopped. Because there had been a thing at 5 o'clock that morning in Hampstead, a thing she had set aside as a dream and not thought of again until this exact moment. A cold under her own breastbone, a turning, a sense of a door giving somewhere very far down, and a single word surfacing in her not in her own voice, chosen, and she had woken with her heart pounding and put it down to the strangeness of the day to come, because Hermione Granger did not believe in omens and had built her whole self on not believing in them. No, she said, nothing woke in me. The goblin looked at her for a long moment. Then he inclined his head, the bow of a bargainer who knows a false coin when it is laid on his counter and chooses, for reasons of his own, to let it pass. As you say, he said, the interview is concluded, the truth is yours, what you do with it is the affair of the living, and the living have always been the goblin's best entertainment. He gestured at the door. Go carefully, heir of Black, there are houses in this country that will love you dead far more than they ever loved your father living. And girl, he paused, and there was something in the old coin-colored eyes that might, in a kindlier creature, have been pity, and was in him only accuracy. When the thing you say did not wake wakes again, do not waste the morning calling it a dream. They came up out of Gringotts into a Diagon alley that had not changed at all, and that was the strangest thing of the whole strange day, that the alley went on exactly as before, the owls and the cauldrons and the children pressing their noses to the window of the broom shop, while Harry walked through it carrying, folded small inside his chest, the largest fact of his life. He did not speak until they had walked the length of the alley and turned into the quieter brick of the way back to the Muggle world, and then he said, not looking at her, you lied to him. Hermione did not pretend not to understand. Yes, she said, something did waken you, this morning like mine. Yes. She kept walking, her eyes ahead, her jaw set in the way that meant she had decided a thing and was bracing to defend it. And I'm not going to talk about it, Harry, not today, because today is about you. Today you found out who your father is and that he's innocent and that everyone in the world is hunting him for the wrong reason. And that is enough for one day. It is more than enough, and I am not going to let some grand piece of blood magic decide it gets to be about me as well, today of all days, when you need today to be yours. She drew a breath. There will be time for the other thing. There will be far too much time for it, I expect, knowing our luck, but not today. Harry stopped walking. Hermione, he said. She stopped too, reluctantly, and turned, and there was the brace in her shoulders that he had seen before, the readiness worn into her like a groove, to be told she had wandered into a place that was not hers and would be sent out of it. He had never understood, until the goblin asked his question and watched her lie, how deep that groove ran in her, or how much it had cost her, every single day of 3 years, to walk into a world that called her by a word he would not repeat, and to keep on walking anyway. Whatever woke in you, Harry said, if it's bound up with whatever woke in me, then it's not deciding anything's about you instead of me. It's deciding it's about us. The word came out plainer than he had meant it to, and truer. I've had exactly one person, my whole life, walk into the dark next to me and stay. It's you. It's been you since you were 11, and you lied to a professor to keep me out of trouble. So if some 1,000-year-old house wants to reach into my blood and reach into yours at the same minute on the same morning, then I'm not going to call that an accident, and I'm not going to call it a dream, and I'm not going to let you stand there bracing for me to tell you to go home, because that is the last thing on this earth I am ever going to tell you. The brace went out of her shoulders. It did not go all at once. He watched it leave her by degrees, the readiness for rejection draining out of a girl who had been ready for it since the sorting hat took too long over her head, and what came into her face in its place was not the brightness he was used to, but something steadier and harder one, and her eyes were wet, and she was furious about that too, he could tell, furious in the useful way. That was a very good speech, Hermione said unsteadily, for someone who got a dreadful in his last essay on rhetoric. I didn't take rhetoric, I know, it shows. But she had stepped in close, and she put her arms around him, quick and fierce, the hug of a person who does not quite trust herself to do it slowly, and Harry held on, and for a moment in the brick alley between the two worlds, the largest fact of his life was not that his father was an innocent man in a prison, but that he was not, and would never again be, carrying it alone. When she stepped back, she was Hermione again, mind first, the wet eyes already being put away as irrelevant data. All right, she said, here's what we know, and here's the order it matters in. 1. Your father is Sirius Black, and he is innocent, and we can prove the paternity any time we like because it's written in a basin the goblins won't unwrite. 2. The man the entire country thinks is a murderer hunting you is in fact your father, very probably trying to reach you, and the Dementors the ministry has put around the school to catch him will do something far worse than catch him if they get him. They'll take his soul before anyone hears a word he has to say. She had begun to tick the points off on her fingers, fast, the fear pressed down under the work of thinking. 3. There's somebody who put Sirius in Azkaban because somebody betrayed your parents and it wasn't him, which means the real traitor has spent 12 years walking around free while your father rotted in a cell for it. 4. And here her voice changed, dropped, went cold and exact. 4. The goblin said there are houses that would love you dead. He meant the Black's own. He meant whoever stands to lose if a living direct heir turns up, because for 12 years everyone has assumed the line was finished and the black fortune and the black seat were there for the taking by whoever was nearest the blood. And we just walked into Gringotts and made it a fact on the record that they're not finished, that there's an heir, you. So we've made it more dangerous, Harry said. We've made it real, Hermione said. It was always going to come for you, Harry. The blood woke, the line is dying. That was always going to drag you into the middle of the most poisonous family in Britain, whether we went to Gringotts or not. All we've done is find out before they did. She looked up at him, and the cold focus in her face was the thing he trusted most in the world, which means we have a head start, a small one. And we are going to spend it learning everything there is to know about the House of Black before the House of Black comes to collect its heir, because the one advantage we have, the only one, is that I read faster than anyone alive and you are braver than anyone sane, and the people who want you dead are counting on us being children. Harry almost smiled. Aren't we? We're 13, Hermione said. It's not the same thing. Children don't survive what we've survived. She shouldered her bag and the false-covered book inside it and turned them both toward the seam in the world that led back to Surrey. Come on, you're not spending another night in that house. I'll think of something to tell my parents. We have a father to find before the Dementors do, and a traitor to drag into the light, and a 1,000-year-old house full of people who'd see us dead, and we have, by my estimate, until the start of term to get a very great deal cleverer than we are right now. They did their first real thinking in the attic of the Granger house in Hampstead, after Hermione had told her parents a careful half-truth, and her mother had made up the spare bed for Harry without quite asking the questions in her eyes, and the two of them had carried a candle and a borrowed atlas of Britain up the steep stairs into the dark under the roof. Hermione laid the problem out on the floorboards like a general laying out a war. "There are 3 clocks running," she said, "and they're running at different speeds, and if we let any one of them finish before we're ready, we lose. The first clock is your father. He's out, he's coming south, and the Ministry has put Dementors at every entrance to Hogwarts to catch him. That's not a clock that ends with him in a cell, Harry. The Minister has authorized the kiss on sight. If they take him before anyone hears the truth, they take his soul, and the truth dies with the part of him that could have spoken it. So the first clock is the fastest, and it ends the worst." She set a pebble from her windowsill on the map over the north. "The second clock is the real traitor, whoever actually betrayed your parents. He's been free 12 years, he's not in any hurry, but the moment he learns the line has an heir and the heir is digging, he becomes a man with everything to lose, and men with everything to lose move fast and ugly. That clock is slow until we touch it, and then it's the fastest of all. And the third," Harry said, "the third is the one we started today." She set a third pebble down, and her finger rested beside it on the green smudge of the home counties on London, on a house neither of them had ever seen. The House of Black, the fortune, the seat, the name, and everyone who spent 12 years circling it like crows over a dying ewe, waiting for the moment they can call the line dead and take it. We woke that magic this afternoon. We told it there's an heir, which means the crows know now or they will by the week's end, and they will not love what they learn. She sat back on her heels. 3 clocks, and the cruel part, Harry, the part I keep coming back to, is that the thing that saves us on one of them is the thing that damns us on the others. The only proof your father's innocent is that you're his son, but the moment we prove you're his son, you become the most valuable and most hated child in Britain. We can't clear him without crowning you. We can't save him without painting a target on you the size of a house." Harry was quiet, turning the candle so the wax wouldn't gutter. Below them the ordinary house ticked and settled, dentists asleep, a fridge humming, a world that did not know any of this. "Then we do both at once," he said. "We don't get to do them in a safe order. We clear him and we crown me and we drag the traitor into the light, and we do it fast before the crows or the Dementors or the Ministry can stop us, because the second we slow down is the second one of your clocks runs out." He looked up. "You said it yourself. The only advantage we've got is that they think we're children, so let's be the kind of children nobody's planned for." For a moment Hermione just looked at him in the candlelight, and something moved behind her eyes that was not quite a smile and was better than one, the particular fierce gladness of a person who has found, against all the odds of her short, hard-thinking life, someone whose mind runs as fast as her own and in the same direction. "All right," she said. "Then we start with the books, tonight. Everything I can find on the House of Black, on inheritance law, on the Wisengamot, on what a 13-year-old can and can't claim and who decides, and everything I can find on Azkaban and Dementors, and what it actually takes to keep a soul in a body when one of them comes for it. Because if your father is coming, Harry, then sooner or later we're going to be standing between him and a Dementor, and I would very much rather we did that knowing the spell." She pulled the first book out of her bag, cracked it open on the floorboards between them, and the two of them bent their heads over it in the candlelight, and somewhere under London a 1000-year-old house felt its heir begin at last to learn its name, and was, in the cold, patient way of old things, content to wait a little longer. The owl that reached Malfoy Manor that evening did not come from Gringotts. Gringotts sold nothing. But there were clerks in the Ministry's Office of Lineage and Estate whose salaries were modest and whose tastes were not, and one of them had spent a year noticing that the dormant black accounts twitched whenever certain names were spoken near them, and that Lucius Malfoy paid handsomely to be told when they twitched. Lucius read the note at the long table in the drawing room. In the green light of the lamps Narcissa kept lit because they flattered the silver, and he read it twice, and then he set it down beside his wine and looked at nothing for the space of 3 slow breaths. "The Black Estate has been touched," he said. Narcissa looked up from the letter she was writing to her son at school. She had her sister Bellatrix's bones and none of her madness, and she had spent 15 years being the only black left who was both sane and free, which had made her in her own quiet way the most dangerous person at the table. Touched how? An inheritance inquiry, logged this afternoon. The clerk does not have the name of the inquirer, the goblins gave nothing, but he has the shape of it. Lucius turned his wineglass by the stem. Someone asked the blood basin a question about the senior line. And the basin answered. The dormant magic on the Ministry side woke for the first time in 12 years, which it does not do for the dead, Narcissa. It does not wake to confirm an ending, it wakes to register an heir. For a moment Narcissa did not move. The black fortune, the black seat on the Wisengamot, the black name itself. For 12 years these had been a corpse with no one quite bold enough to rob it, because Sirius lived, and while Sirius lived the line was not legally extinct, only imprisoned, and a man in Azkaban could father no one and claim nothing. The whole of Lucius's patient arithmetic, Draco's blood, was black blood through his mother. In time, with the right deaths and the right silences, the seat could come to a Malfoy, rested on the certainty that the senior line ended in a cell. "There is no heir," Narcissa said. "There cannot be. My cousin has no child. The line ends with him and he is as good as dead." The basin disagrees. Lucius drank. "I have spent a great deal of money over a great many years to ensure that when the line of black finally fell, it would fall into the hands best fitted to hold it. I do not intend to discover at this late hour that there is a hand I had not counted. Find out who walked into Gringotts today and ask the blood a question." He rose, and his shadow went long and thin up the greenlit wall. "If there is an heir, Narcissa, then there is a problem. And problems in this family have always had the same solution." He did not say the word. He had never needed to. It was the family motto in everything but Latin, and it had outlived everyone who first spoke it, and it waited in the green light of the drawing room like a thing that has all the time in the world. That night in the smallest bedroom of number 4 for the last time, Harry lay awake with his bare left wrist held up to the thin light of the street lamp, and he pressed his fingers to the place and watched the silver-dark writing rise. It did not say the line is dying anymore. The blood had answered the question of who. It had found its heir. And the words that surfaced now, slow and cold and certain in the old hand older than English, were different, and they made the cold under his breastbone turn over not with fear, for the first time, but with something he had no name for, something perilously close to hope. "The heir is found, the blood of the House of Black wrote in the skin of Harry Potter. The seat will be filled, the father comes." And far to the north, on a cold black rock in a cold black sea, in a cell the Dementors had haunted for 12 years, a gaunt man with gray eyes and matted black hair sat up in the dark, because something he had been forbidden to be sure of for 13 years had, all at once and against every binding laid on him, become a certainty he could not have explained to a soul. That the boy was real, that the boy was his, that the boy was calling, and that there was at last, after all the long dark years, a reason fierce enough to be worth the swimming. Sirius Black pressed his thin face to the bars of his cell and looked south, toward a city he could not see, toward a son he had never been allowed to know he had, and for the first time since the night they took him, he did not weep. He began, very quietly, to plan. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Father and Son. The blood led Harry to his father the way a compass leads north, not in words after that first night, but in a steady cold pull beneath the breastbone that grew stronger the further south the autumn carried him, until by the 3rd week of term it had become a thing he could no more ignore than a sound he could not stop hearing. Sirius Black was close. Harry knew it the way he knew his own name now. The man was near the school, hidden somewhere in the wild ground beyond the walls, drawn south by the same waking blood that pulled Harry north toward him, 2 ends of one severed line trying against 12 years and 1,000 laws to find each other again. "It's getting stronger," he told Hermione low in the library where they had spent every free hour since September with a fortress of books built up around them. "The pull, he's not just close anymore, he's deciding to come." Hermione did not look up from the page she was annotating in her small, fierce hand. "Then we have very little time," she said, "and a great many things still to get right." She turned the book toward him. It was a slim gray volume she had charmed out of the restricted section with a note from a professor she had not, strictly speaking, asked. "Read that, the part I've underlined, and tell me you understand why it terrifies me." Harry read. Passage was about the Dementor's kiss, written in the dry voice of a law that had decided cruelty was procedure, and the part she had underlined said that the kiss, once administered, could not be revoked, reversed, or appealed, because the thing it took could not be put back, and that the Minister for Magic had standing to authorize it on sight without trial against any soul deemed a sufficient danger to the public peace. "He's deemed a sufficient danger," Harry said. "He's the most deemed dangerous man in Britain." Hermione took the book back, "Which means the instant a Dementor reaches him, it doesn't matter that he's innocent, it doesn't matter that we can prove he's your father, it doesn't matter that the real traitor is somewhere walking around free. None of the truth survives the kiss, Harry, because there's no mouth left to speak it, so we cannot let them reach him, not for an hour, not for a minute." She closed the book and looked at him, and the fear in her was pressed down hard under the work of thinking, the only place she had ever known to put it. "Which is a problem, because the one thing your father is absolutely certain to do is walk straight into the most heavily guarded castle in the country to reach the son his blood is screaming at him to find, and the castle is ringed with the exact creatures that will end him." Harry was quiet. Outside the high library windows the grounds had gone the color of old bronze, and somewhere past the lake's far shore, in the dark line of the forbidden forest, the pull under his breastbone turned over, slow and patient and getting closer. "Then we don't wait for him to come in," Harry said. "We go out to meet him first." Going out to meet him proved easier said than done, because a boy cannot simply walk out of Hogwarts in the middle of term, and the Dementors that ringed the school did not distinguish between an escaped murderer and the son who was trying to save him. So they prepared, the way Hermione prepared for everything, which was relentlessly. The Patroness was the heart of it. She had found the spell in the restricted section in the first week of term and judged, with the cold accuracy she brought to questions of survival, that the single most likely way this autumn ended with someone dead was a Dementor reaching Sirius before they did, and so she had decided that she and Harry would learn to drive Dementors off, and she had decided it the way she decided a difficult theorem was going to yield, which was that it had no choice in the matter. It was the hardest magic either of them had ever attempted. The patroness demanded a memory strong enough and bright enough to hold against the cold that ate joy, and the trouble, the thing neither of them said aloud in the empty classroom Lupin had quietly let them use, was that between the two of them, they did not have very many bright memories to spend. Harry reached again and again for something happy enough and came up with the thin gruel of a childhood under the stairs. Hermione reached and found a girl who had been clever and lonely in equal measure and had banked her warmth all her life against a coldness she had expected the world to keep delivering. "It's not working," Harry said the 9th night after the silver had guttered and died from his wand for the 9th time, "because I haven't got anything big enough. That's the truth of it, isn't it? You need a memory strong enough to fill you up, and I've spent my whole life being careful not to want things, because wanting them and not getting them was worse than not wanting at all. I trained myself out of having the kind of memory this spell needs." Hermione lowered her own wand. She did not tell him that wasn't true because it was true, and she had never once in 3 years insulted him by pretending a true hard thing was not true. "Then we make new ones," she said instead. "That's the part nobody tells you about the spell, Harry. It doesn't have to be a memory of something that happened to you years ago. It has to be a feeling strong enough to hold the cold off, and you have got one of those. You've had it for a month and you keep not counting it because you don't trust it yet." She stepped closer in the empty classroom, her voice dropping. "The night in the shrieking shack, when you crossed the floor, when you stopped being a boy with no one and became a boy with a father. That's not some faint thing you've been hoarding against the dark. It's the biggest thing that's ever happened to you, and it happened 4 weeks ago, and it's still happening. Every time you go down that tunnel and he looks at you like you're the only light left in the world." She held his gaze. "Use that. Stop reaching back for a childhood that didn't have anything in it. Reach for the thing you've got now. Reach for him." Harry closed his eyes. He reached not back but here, to the gaunt man in the dark who had wept to be allowed to hold him, to the word son said where no one could hear, to the impossible new fact that there was a person in the world who would have died to know him, and he held it up against the imagined cold, and he said the words, and the silver that broke from his wand this time did not gutter. It stood, it gathered. It threw a clean white light across the empty classroom that pushed the shadows back into the corners and held them there. "There," Hermione said softly, and there was something fierce and glad in her face. "There it is." Hers came harder and later, and Harry never did learn the whole of what she finally reached for, only that when the silver otter at last broke bright and quick from her wand, she had tears standing in her eyes and would not say why, and he did not ask, because he had learned that the largest things in Hermione Granger were the ones she guarded most carefully, and that the way to honor them was not to demand they be shown, but to stand where she could see him and wait. By the end of the fortnight they could both hold a corporeal patroness for nearly a minute. It would not be enough, Hermione said, against a horde, but it might be enough against one in the dark for the length of time it took to get a man to safety. And as it turned out, it very nearly was, and the very nearly was the part that would keep both of them awake for a long time after. They got their chance on a night that started with a rat. It was Ron's rat, Scabbers, the fat gray thing Ron had carried since first year, a creature that had been failing all autumn, growing thin and frantic and forever trying to flee. Ron had blamed Hermione's cat for it, and the two of them had not properly spoken in a fortnight, which was the only reason Ron was crossing the dark grounds alone after curfew that night, chasing the rat that had bolted from his pocket toward the whooping willow, as though all the devils of the world were behind it. Harry and Hermione were already out. They had slipped from the castle under Harry's father's cloak, his father James's cloak, the invisibility cloak, and Harry had stopped, that autumn, every time he reached for it, on the strange new arithmetic of having had two fathers, one who left him a cloak and one who was crawling across the dark to find him, drawn out by the pull beneath Harry's breastbone, which had risen that night to steady, insistent ache, because the blood knew, before the boys did, that the line was about to close. So they saw Ron run. They saw the great black dog come out of the dark at the foot of the willow, and Harry's whole body lit cold with recognition, because the pull under his breastbone surged toward the dog, and he understood in one impossible instant that the dog was the man, that his father was an animagus, a great gaunt black hound, and that the hound had Ron's leg in its jaws and was dragging boy and rat both into a gap that had opened at the willow's roots. "That's him," Harry breathed. "Hermione, that's him, that's my father." They ran. The tunnel under the willow was long and low and smelled of earth and old blood, and it came up at last into a house Harry knew by reputation only, the Shrieking Shack, the most haunted building in Britain, which was not haunted at all. He would learn within the hour, and never had been. The screams that had named it had come not from ghosts, but from a boy who turned into a wolf one night a month and had nowhere kinder to do it. They came up through a trapdoor into a room of broken furniture and boarded windows and dust, and there, in the gray moonlight that came through the cracks, Harry saw his father for the first time. Sirius Black was not what the photographs in the papers had made him. The papers had made a screaming skull, a wild-eyed murderer, the face the Ministry wanted the country to fear. The man crouched against the far wall with Ron pulled behind him, and the struggling rat clamped in one filthy hand was gaunt to the edge of skeletal. His face all bone and shadow, his black hair matted to his shoulders, his prison robes hanging off him, and his eyes, when they came up and found Harry's, were gray, and they were not mad, and they were not cruel, and they filled, in the space of a single breath, with something so enormous and so undefended that Harry forgot to be afraid. "You came," Sirius Black said. His voice was a ruin, cracked and rasping from 12 years of disuse. He looked at Harry the way a man dying of thirst looks at water he does not dare believe is real. "I told myself all the way south in the water, in the dark, I told myself I'd imagined it, the pull, I told myself a man in Azkaban imagines a great many things and I shouldn't trust any of them. But you came, you felt it too." His ruined face worked. "You're real." "I'm real," Harry said. He did not move toward the man yet. There was a part of him, the part the Dursleys had built, that did not know how to walk toward someone who was glad to see him. But the pull under his breastbone was a roar now, the severed line straining to close, and Harry stood in the dust of the haunted house and looked at his father and felt the whole architecture of his life quietly rearrange itself. "You don't know," Sirius said, "do you? Whatever you felt, whatever called you, you don't know what it means. They wouldn't have let anyone tell you. They couldn't." A terrible hope had come into the gray eyes. "Harry, there's a thing I was made not to be sure of for 13 years. A thing I'm only certain of now because the not being sure broke the night the blood woke. I felt it break in my cell like a bone setting, and I have to ask you, and I have to know I'm not mad, because if I'm mad I would rather you kissed me yourself than tell me you're my father," Harry said. The room went very still. "Not James," Harry said, because the man's face had not yet dared to believe it, and Harry could not bear to make him wait a second longer than he had already waited 12 years. "James raised me, James loved me, James died for me, and I'll never stop being his son, not ever. But the blood, we went to Gringotts, me and Hermione, we made the Basin tell us. James couldn't have children, a curse in the war took it from him. And the three of them, James and my mum and you did a thing to keep both lines alive and to keep me safe, and you let them take your certainty away so no one could ever torture it out of you." Harry's own voice had gone unsteady, and he let it. "You're my father, by blood, it's written in a basin the goblins won't unwrite. You didn't betray my parents, you are my parents, one of them. And they put you in Azkaban for 12 years for a murder you didn't do, and you couldn't even be sure I was yours." Sirius Black made a sound Harry had never heard a grown man make. It was not a sob, quite. It was the sound of a thing held under unbearable pressure for unbearably long, giving way all at once, the sound of 12 years of a love he had not been permitted to be certain he was allowed to feel, breaking its dam. He let go of the rat, he let go of Ron. He came up off the wall and crossed the dusty floor on legs that barely held him, and he stopped an arm's length from Harry, his ruined hands half raised, not daring, after everything, to close the last of the distance without permission. "Can I?" Sirius said. "Is it? Would you let me?" Harry crossed the last of it himself. He had not hugged many people in his life, he had not been hugged. But he put his arms around the gaunt wreck of the man who was his father, and felt how thin he was, how cold, how the prison robes hung off bones that had been a young laughing man once at his parents' wedding. And Sirius Black folded down around him and held on the way a drowning man holds on, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing in any language that would have carried the weight of it, and they both knew enough not to try. Across the room, Hermione had her wand up and trained on the door, and her other hand was pressed flat to her own breastbone, where a thing she had told a goblin had not woken was, very quietly, waking, and she said nothing about that either, because this hour belonged to the two of them, and she had decided the night in the attic that she would be the one who watched the door so that they could afford to stop watching it. The rat tried to run while they were not looking, and that was its mistake. It had reached the gap under the door and very nearly through it when the door opened from the outside, and a man stood in it with his wand already drawn, and his shabby coat hanging off a frame as thin in its own way as Sirius's, and Harry knew him, because he had been teaching defense against the dark arts since September and was the best teacher Harry had ever had. "Professor Lupin," Hermione said, and did not lower her wand, because she trusted no one in that room she had not personally reasoned her way into trusting, not even the man who had spent a term teaching her to fight the dark. Remus Lupin did not look at her. He was looking at the rat frozen in the gap under the door, and his tired face had gone the color of the moonlight, and his wand did not waver. "Hello, Peter," he said. The rat went very, very still. What happened next Harry would try to lay out for Hermione afterward in the order it occurred, because she would want it in order, and so, he found, did he, but in the moment it came all at once, a knot of revelation pulling tight. Lupin's wand flicked that hauled the rat up off the floor and held it twisting in the air. Sirius's snarl, the first wholly savage sound he had made, the sound of 12 years of a single name held behind his teeth, Pettigrew, the rat's frantic squealing. And then the spell Lupin's and Sirius's together, two old friends casting the same charm at the same instant as though no 12 years had passed, and the rat unfolding, stretching, sprouting, swelling into a small, gray, balding man with watery eyes and a nose that twitched and hands he wrung together as he turned, gibbering from one face to the next, looking for the one that might still hold mercy. Sirius, old friend, Peter Pettigrew's voice was a wet, wheedling thing. You don't understand the Dark Lord. There are things you can't imagine, weapons you can't. He would have killed me. You sold them, Sirius said. He had pushed Harry behind him without seeming to decide to, and he stood swaying on his ruined legs between his son and the man who had unmade his life. You were their secret keeper. We changed it to you at the last hour because no one would ever have suspected weak little Peter. That was the whole point. That was my idea, my clever idea, and you went straight to him with it. You gave them to him, and then you cut off your own finger and blew apart a street in 12 muggles and let them bury an empty robe and a finger and call it Peter Pettigrew, hero, and you let them take me. His voice cracked. You let them take me, Peter. 13 years. I couldn't even be sure I had a son because of what we did to keep him safe, and you knew the whole time that the boy was mine because you were there the night we swore the right, you held the candle, and you let me rot in the dark and never said a word. The watery eyes flicked to Harry. Harry, Pettigrew breathed, shuffling a step, hands out. You look just like Harry, your father, James. He was my friend. He wouldn't have wanted. Don't, Harry said. Say his name. The flat cold in his own voice surprised him. It seemed to surprise Pettigrew more. The little man flinched back, and in the flinch Harry saw the whole shape of him, the thing that had spent 13 years as a rat because a rat was what he was, a creature that survived by being small, by being beneath notice, by belonging to whoever was winning, and Harry understood, with a clarity that was almost pity and was not pity at all, that here was the proof. Here, wringing his hands in the moonlight, was the living proof that would clear his father. Not a Bason's word, not a child's claim. A confessed, transformed witness traitor, alive, the man the world believed dead these 12 years. We don't kill him, Harry said. Sirius's wand did not lower. Harry, we don't kill him. Harry stepped up beside his father and put one hand on the gaunt arm, on the wand arm, not forcing it down, only resting there. Listen to me. I know what he is. I know what he took from you, what he took from all of us. And I have wanted my whole life to know who did it, and now he's standing here and I could let you, and part of me wants to. He drew a breath. But a dead Peter Pettigrew is a rat that died in a haunted house. A dead Peter Pettigrew clears nothing. He's still the hero who blew up a street, and you're still the murderer who finally finished the job, and they kiss you in the morning. The only version of tonight where you go free is the one where he's alive to say what he did, in front of people who can't pretend they didn't hear it. He tightened his grip fractionally. I didn't get a father back tonight to lose him at dawn because we wanted the wrong ending. We take him alive. We make him talk where it counts. That's how you win, isn't it? You said it yourself, a clever idea, the one suspects, so let's be cleverer than the man who beat you with a clever idea once already. For a long moment Sirius Black looked at his son, at the boy who had his mother's eyes and his own stubborn jaw and a steadiness neither of them had had at 13, and something moved through the ruin of his face that was grief and pride and a kind of all at once. Merlin, Sirius said softly, you're hers all through, aren't you? James's hands and Lily's eyes and a head that won't stop working even when the wand's already up. His own wand came down, not all the way, never all the way, but down. All right, Harry, we take him alive. A ghost of something crossed his face that must once, before Azkaban, have been a grin. I always was better with a plan than without one. I just got out of the habit of having them. Getting Pettigrew out of the shrieking shack alive turned out to be the easy part. Keeping him that way with Dementors in the grounds and a full moon climbing turned out very nearly to cost them everything. Hermione saw it first. She always saw it first. She had been doing the arithmetic in the back of her mind the entire time, the part of her that never stopped, and as they bound Pettigrew with the cords from Lupin's wand and started him toward the tunnel, she stopped dead in the middle of the dusty floor with her face gone white. The moon, she said. Professor Lupin, the moon. Did you take your potion tonight? The room went cold for an entirely new reason. Remus Lupin's hand had begun very slightly to shake. No, he said, and his voice had changed, gone careful and far away. No, when I saw Peter's name on the map, I forgot. 13 years I have never once forgotten, and tonight, the one night, he looked up, and there was a terrible apology in his eyes, and beneath the apology something else, rising, that was not Remus Lupin at all. Get them out, Sirius. Get them out now, I can't, I haven't got long, and then the clouds tore off the moon, and the light came down full and white through the broken roof, and the man who had been the best teacher Harry ever had began to come apart. What followed was the worst quarter of an hour of Harry's life to that point, and he had a great many to compare it to. Sirius shoved them toward the tunnel and turned back, not to fight, but to change, the great black dog erupting out of the man because a dog could grapple a wolf where a man could only die. And the two old friends who had run together as a wolf and a dog under 30 moons fell on each other in the splintering dark. And in the chaos Pettigrew, of course, Harry would think afterward, sick with it, found a dropped wand, blasted his cords. and twisted small and gray and gone into a crack in the floor before any of them could close a hand on him. No, Harry lunged for the gap and Hermione hauled him back by the collar with strength he had not known she had. He's a rat in a forest at night, Harry, you will never catch him, and there is a werewolf 8 feet away from us. Her voice was shaking and absolutely clear, both at once. We've lost Pettigrew. We have not lost your father, and we are about to if we don't move. They moved. They got out into the grounds with the dog driving the wolf away into the trees behind them, and they thought for one breath that the worst was past. And then the cold came. It came the way the writing had come up in Harry's skin that first morning, from everywhere and nowhere, a cold with no temperature, the cold of joy being drawn out of the world, and the lake's far shore went dark with shapes, dozens of them, scores of them, gliding low over the dead grass, and Harry's knees buckled, and in his ears rose the screaming he heard whenever they were near, the green light and the woman's voice that was his mother dying over and over, the last thing she ever did. The Dementors had felt it too, the closing of the line, the great pull of the woken blood, and they had come for the feast. Sirius, man again, had fallen to the grass between Harry and the lake, the dog's courage spent, the 12 years of stored despair flooding back into him all at once with the creatures so near, and he was the thing the whole horde wanted most, the escaped soul, the authorized kiss, and they were coming for him, and Harry could not stand, and the cold was winning, and his mother was screaming in his ears. Harry, Hermione's voice close, fierce, refusing the cold. She had got an arm under him, and her wand was up, and her hand was shaking, and her jaw was set in the groove he trusted more than his own courage. We learned this, we learned the spell, all summer. The happiest memory, find the strongest when you've got, and hold it and say the words, say them with me, and Harry reached, drowning for the happiest thing he owned, and found it was not old, found it was an hour old, found it was the moment in the dust of a haunted house when a ruined man had asked permission to hold him and he had crossed the floor himself, the moment he stopped being a boy with no one and became a boy with a father. And he held it up against the dark like a coal in his 2 hands, and he and Hermione spoke the words together into the killing cold. Expctopatronum, the light that broke from their wands was not one shape. It was 2, and they came out tangled and then sprang apart and then ran together. A great silver stag, antlers high, James's stag, his father's shape leaping out of Harry's wand by some grief-deep instinct neither of them would ever fully explain. And beside it, out of Hermione's, a creature she had never summoned before and would not have predicted. A silver otter, quick and bright and unafraid, that wheeled once around the stag as though it had been running beside it its whole life. The 2 patronesses charged the horde together, and the cold broke, and the Dementors fled back across the black lake in a tearing of shadow, and the grass was empty, and the night was only a night again. Sirius lay in the wet grass, gasping, alive, his soul still his own. Harry knelt over his father in the dark with the silver light fading and the otter and the stag dissolving into mist above them. And Hermione knelt on the other side with her wand still up and her chest heaving, and the 3 of them stayed like that for a moment in the cold, ordinary autumn dark, a man who had nearly lost everything twice in one night, and the sun who had pulled him back, and the girl whose magic had answered Harry's without either of them asking it to, and none of them spoke. Because the size of it was past speaking, and they had all, by now, learned that much. They could not take Sirius into the castle, and they could not leave him in the grounds, and so they did the only thing left and took him nowhere at all, into the deep dark beneath the whooping willow's roots, into a hollow in the tunnel that Sirius the dog had used as a den these past weeks, and Hermione warded the entrance with everything she had learned that autumn, which was a very great deal. And Harry sat with his father in the earth-smelling dark, and they talked until the sky past the tunnel's mouth went from black to gray. Sirius wanted to know everything. He wanted it the way the starved want food, in 2 large mouthfuls, faster than he could swallow. What Harry liked, what he was good at, was he happy, were they kind to him, the people James had left him with, and Harry found he could not lie to the gray eyes and so told the truth, some of it, the cupboard and the cold and the years of being no one's, and watched a fury kindle in his father that was not the fury of a murderer but the much more dangerous fury of a parent, and Sirius said, very quietly, "You're never going back there, do you understand me, Harry, whatever else happens, whatever it costs? You are never spending another night under that woman's roof. I have a house. It's a terrible house. It's a vile, poisonous old house, and I hate every stone of it, but it's mine, it's ours, it's black, and the moment I'm a free man it's yours, and you will never be cold and alone in the dark again as long as I'm breathing. I swore that to your mother before you were born, and I'm swearing it to you now." Harry was quiet for a moment in the earth dark. Then he asked the thing he had been carrying since Gringotts, the thing the basin had shown but not explained. "Why did you do it, the right, the making yourself not sure? I understand the why of the secret, the keeping me hidden, but why did you let them take the knowing of it out of you? You could have raised me as James's and just known in your own head that I was yours." Sirius was silent so long that Harry thought he would not answer. When he did, his ruined voice had gone somewhere far back, to a kitchen with low lamps and a war pressing on the windows. "Because I'd have looked at you," Sirius said, "every day, across the room at the table when James held you, I'd have looked at you and known, and a man can't hide a thing like that in his face forever, not from a Legilimens, not from the Dark Lord, not when he's tortured, and we all knew by then that any one of us might be. So the right didn't just hide it from the world. It hid it from me, it took the certainty clean out of my head and put it in your blood under lock so that if they ever caught me and cracked me open, there'd be nothing in there to find. I couldn't betray what I wasn't permitted to know. His hand tightened on Harry's in the dark. Your mother held the candle. James cut the binding. And the last thing I remember being sure of before the right took it was James putting his hand on my shoulder and saying, "He'll be mine and he'll be yours and he'll never know a day without both of us." He was wrong about that, Merlin forgive us all, but he meant it more than he ever meant anything. He gave me his son and his name to hide him under, and he never once, not once, made me feel I'd taken anything from him. The gray eyes shone in the dark. He loved you, Harry. Before you were born, before he knew if the curse would let him have a child at all, he loved the idea of you so much he was willing to make him out of his best friend rather than let the war take you off the board. Don't ever let anyone tell you James Potter wasn't your father. He chose to be. That's more than most men who share a child's blood ever do. Harry could not answer that for a while. He did not try to. He had learned this autumn that some things were too large to be answered and only had to be sat inside of. You'll have to be a free man first, Hermione said from the tunnel mouth where she was keeping the watch she had appointed herself. She said it gently, but she said it because someone had to, and it had always been her. And we just lost the only thing that could make you one. Pettigrew's gone, Mr. Black. Back to Rat, back to the dark, and he'll run straight to whatever's left of the people he sold you to. We're exactly where we were this morning, except now they know you're here, and now they know there's a witness who got away, and now the Dementors have tasted you and they'll want the rest. Sirius looked at her for the first time properly, at the girl in the tunnel mouth with her wand still in her hand, and the dirt of the night on her face, and a mind he could feel working even in the dark. "You're the one who took him to Gringotts," he said. "You're the one watching the door." "Someone has to watch the door," said Hermione. "My son," said Sirius Black, and there was wonder in it, "has very good taste in the people he keeps." He looked between the two of them, and something settled in his ruined face, some old marauder cunning waking up after a long sleep. "All right, we're not where we were this morning. We're better off, and you're too tired to see it. This morning I was a madman in the papers, and you were two children with a basin's word. Tonight 3 of us and a werewolf saw Peter Pettigrew alive and heard him confess, and a Hogwarts professor will swear to it, and the goblins have the blood on record, and there's a great cold house in London with a vault full of money and a seat on the Wisengamot and 200 years of dark old magic, and it's about to have a master again." The grin came back, ghastly and real. Peter ran. "Fine. Let him run. He's a small, frightened creature, and small, frightened creatures always run to a bigger one, so we don't chase the rat. We go after the thing that makes a man choose to be a rat, the people, the power, the house, the law. We stop being hunted, Harry. We start owning things, and there is no one in Britain, no one, harder to kiss at dawn than the lord of an ancient and noble house standing on the floor of the Wisengamot with the law in his hand." Harry looked at the father he had had for one night, gaunt and hunted and grinning in the dark, and at Hermione in the tunnel mouth, exhausted and unbroken, and he felt the pull beneath his breastbone, the line, no longer severed, no longer straining, only humming now, low and warm and whole. "The House of Black," Harry said slowly. "That's what the blood's been pulling at the whole time, not just to you, through you, to the house, to the seat." He looked at Hermione, and she had gone very still in the tunnel mouth, one hand drifting, without her seeming to notice, to her own breastbone, to the thing she had told a goblin had not woken, and that had answered a stag with an otter not an hour before, and that she could not, Harry suspected, keep secret very much longer. "We thought we had 3 clocks running. We've got a 4th. The house wants its heir, and it's going to come for me whether we're ready or not." "Then let it come," said Sirius Black, the lord of the most ancient and noble house of Black, in the grey light of the dawn that was about to break on the first morning of the rest of his son's life. "We'll be ready. We've got the one thing that house hasn't seen in 200 years. He reached out and took Harry's hand, and held it the way a father holds a son's hand, badly, out of practice, and absolutely. "It's got someone left who's worth its name." Far to the south, in a cold green drawing room, a small grey man stood dripping rainwater on the carpet and stammered his news to a tall pale wizard who listened without expression and grew, with every word, more dangerously still. "Slower," Lucius Malfoy said. "You are gibbering, Peter, and I find I cannot tell which of your terrors is the one that matters." He had not risen from his chair. He turned his wineglass by the stem, and the green lamplight slid along the silver of his cane, and Pettigrew flinched from the small movement as a rat flinches from a shadow. "Begin again. The boy, the black boy, you are certain." "I held the candle," Pettigrew whispered, "the night they made the rite, 13 years ago. James couldn't, there was a curse, and they used Sirius, and they hid it so deep that Sirius himself forgot he knew. And I never told, I swear to you, I never told a soul, not even him at the end, because a secret's only worth something while you're the only one holding it." He wrung his hands. "But it's true, Potter's boy, Harry Potter. He's Sirius Black's son. He's the heir of the whole House of Black." And he knows it now. The blood woke, I felt it wake. The whole castle felt the Dementors come for the taste of it. The wineglass stopped turning. For a long moment Lucius Malfoy said nothing, and in the silence the whole of his patient 12-year arithmetic rearranged itself behind his pale eyes, the dormant vaults, the empty Wisengamot seat, the fortune he had meant to draw to his own son through Narcissa's blood, all of it now standing not empty but occupied by a 13-year-old half-blood with a dead mother and a convict for a father and the most famous scar in Britain on his forehead. A child. A child stood between Lucius Malfoy and the oldest dark fortune in the country. It was, he reflected, almost insultingly convenient. "You have done me a service, Peter," Lucius said at last, "though you are too frightened to understand which one. You think you have brought me a danger. You have brought me a gift." He set the glass down and steepled his fingers. "Consider what the world believes this morning and will go on believing because the ministry has staked its credibility on it. The world believes Sirius Black is a murderer who has broken out of prison for one purpose, to find and kill the Potter boy. The minister himself has authorized the kiss on sight. Every Dementor in Britain hunts him on that understanding." A thin smile touched his mouth and did not reach his eyes. "And now you tell me the man is in fact the boy's father, come not to kill but to claim. How tragic, how very inconvenient for them if it were ever to be believed." "But it will not be believed, Peter, because no one will say it, because the only mouths that could say it are a hunted convict, 2 children, and a werewolf, and not one of those is a witness any court in this country will hear over the word of the minister for magic. But the goblins, the basin, the goblins' record, they do not testify. They will sell the truth to no one and confirm it for no one, and the Wisengamot has never once in its history admitted a goblin's basin as evidence of lineage against the objection of an interested house." Lucius rose at last, and his shadow went long up the greenlit wall. "And I, Peter, am a very interested house. My wife is a daughter of Black, my son carries the blood. There is a claim to be made, a clean claim, a pure claim, a claim the Wisengamot will be only too glad to hear, that the senior line is extinct, that no right-born half-blood concealed under a mudblood's protection charm can stand as heir to an ancient and noble house, and that the seat and the vaults and the name must pass, regrettably, to the nearest pure and untainted blood." He smoothed an invisible crease from his sleeve. "The boy's father will be kissed before he can ever stand to contest it. The boy himself is a child with no standing and no guardian and a great many powerful people who would prefer him quiet. And the truth, the inconvenient little truth you have so kindly carried to me, that truth will stay exactly where it has always been safest. Locked in a basin no one will open, behind the teeth of a man no one will let speak." He looked down at Pettigrew, and there was nothing in his pale eyes at all, which was the most frightening thing about them. "Go back to your hole, Peter," Lucius Malfoy said. "Be small, be quiet, be the rat you have always been. And when this is finished and the House of Black answers to a Malfoy, I will see that you are rewarded with the one thing you have ever truly wanted." His smile thinned, to be left entirely alone, and the 4th clock, the one Harry had only just learned to count, began in earnest to run. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The Black Heir. The house called its heir on the night of the new moon, and it did not ask. Harry woke in the den beneath the whooping willow with the cold under his breastbone gone molten, no longer a pull but a summons, and he sat up in the earth dark to find that the tunnel wall beside him was no longer a wall. A seam had opened in the packed earth, a thread of darkness that widened as he watched into a doorway, and beyond it was not more tunnel but a corridor of black stone hung with green fire that gave no heat, running down and away into a dark so deep it had a weight. Sirius was awake too, the great black dog risen to his feet with his hackles up, and then the dog was a man, gaunt and gray-faced in the green light spilling from the impossible door, and Sirius Black was staring into the corridor with an expression Harry had not seen on him before, something between homesickness and horror. "It's reaching for you," Sirius said. His ruined voice had gone very quiet. "The house. It knows there's an heir of the blood awake at last, and it's opening a blood road to bring you home. I haven't seen one of these since I was a boy. My mother used to walk them." He swallowed. "Harry, that corridor runs to number 12, Grimmauld Place, to the house I was born in and ran away from at 16 and swore I'd never set foot in again, and it wants you." "Then I'll go," Harry said. "You don't know what's down there." Sirius caught his arm, and his grip was thin, but it was iron. "It's not just a house. The Blacks built things into it, dark old things, wards and bindings, and there's a heart to it, Harry, a thing my family guarded for 1,000 years, and I never understood it, and I was never meant to because I ran. But I know it tests the blood that comes to it. It will reach into you and weigh you and decide whether you're truly its heir, and if it decides wrong, or if it decides you're a thief in its halls, it will not let you leave." His gray eyes were desperate. "Let me go first. I'm the Lord." "It knows me. I'll go and I'll—" "You can't," Hermione said. She had woken at the green light and risen and was already standing, already dressed, already thinking, the fear pressed flat under the work of it. "You can't, Mr. Black, and you know you can't. The house is the most watched address in Britain. The ministry has it under surveillance, the ancestral seat of the man they're hunting. Of course they're watching it." The instant the wards register the escaped Sirius Black inside his own front door, they'll have Dementors there in minutes, and you'll be kissed on your own doorstep before you've crossed the hall. She drew a breath, but they're not watching for an unknown 13-year-old who comes up through a blood road that doesn't touch the front door at all. They have no reason to watch for an heir because as far as the world knows, there isn't one. Harry can go where you can't, her jaw set, and he's not going alone. Sirius looked between them, the son the house was reaching for, and the girl who had already decided to walk into the dark beside him, and the desperation in his face gave way, by degrees, to something that was almost peace. No, he agreed, he's not. The blood road was not long, and it was not short. It existed, Hermione would say afterward, in the way that the inside of a magical tent existed, in a space the ordinary rules of distance had agreed to leave alone, and they walked it for either 10 minutes or 200 years, two children in a corridor of black stone under green fire, going down. They came out into a kitchen. It was the most ordinary destination imaginable and somehow the most frightening, a vast cold cavern of a kitchen, all black flags and an enormous dead hearth and a long table scarred by 1,000 dinners no one had eaten in 12 years. Dust lay on everything in a gray velvet. The blood road sealed itself behind them with a sound like a held breath let go, and the green fire that had lit their way drew up into the brackets on the kitchen walls and burned there, low and steady, and Harry understood that the whole house had woken to receive him and was now in the dark watching. "Filth," said a voice from the doorway. "Filth in the deep house." The creature that dragged itself into the green light was a house elf, or had been one once, its skin hanging off it in ashen folds, its eyes huge and bloodshot and curdled, somewhere down the long years from grief into hatred. It wore a rag the gray of a thing wrung out in dirty water 1,000 times, and it crept toward them with its long fingers hooked, its mouth working, and Harry's hand went to his wand. "Thieves in mistress's kitchen," the elf crooned. "Children come to rob the dead house, and one of them," its terrible eyes swung to Hermione, and the word it used struck the air like a slap. "One of them is filth of the lowest kind, mudblood filth, in the kitchen where Mistress Walburga took her tea. Creature sees. Creature sees what crawls up the blood road to steal." "Don't," Harry said, "call her that." The elf creature laughed, a sound like a wet rag torn slowly in two. "Children give creature orders. The house has been alone 200, no. No, no, no." The hatred in the bloodshot eyes flickered all at once into something far worse, into hope. Creature had gone still. Creature was staring at Harry, at the cold light that had begun very faintly to gather at Harry's breastbone where the summons had burned all night, and the elf's ruined face began to crumple. Blood, blood of the house, blood of the senior line, warm and living, come up the road the way the heirs came when Creature was young. A whine tore out of it. But wrong, wrong, wrong. Talented. "The blood is Master Sirius's." Creature tastes it. "Master Sirius, the blood traitor who ran, who broke Mistress's heart, who is in the dark where he belongs, and the boy is half a Potter, a half blood, and he brings a mudblood into the deep house. And Creature must let them, Creature must, because the blood is the senior blood and Creature cannot deny the senior blood. Oh, what would Mistress say? What would Mistress say to see it?" "You could ask her," said a new voice. And it was the coldest thing Harry had heard since the Dementors. "If you had the wit, you wretched creature, to wake me sooner." The kitchen door swung wide on darkness, and the darkness was a corridor, and at the corridor's end, where the green fire climbed a great staircase, a portrait hung that had begun, in its heavy gilt frame, to move. Woman in it was old and had been beautiful and had let cruelty wear the beauty down to something hard and yellow, and her black eyes found Harry across the length of the house with an accuracy that had nothing to do with painted sight. "So," said the portrait of Walburga Black, "the blood road runs again. After 12 years of silence, my house wakes itself to drag in what? Let me see what my house thinks fit to call its heir." The black eyes raked him. A boy in a school jumper, James Potter's spectacles. Lily Evans's eyes, oh yes, I knew them both. I knew that whole nest of blood traitors and mudbloods my son ran to, and under it all, yes, faint, polluted, but there, my blood, Sirius's blood, the blood my disgrace of a son carried out the door and squandered on. Her painted face contorted. On what, whose belly did he get an heir in, that worthless boy that he hid it for 13 years and let the line rot? "Speak, child, whose son are you?" "Yours, apparently," Harry said. "Worse luck." The portrait shrieked, a sound that brought the dust off the rafters, and the whole house seemed to flinch, and Hermione's hand found Harry's wrist, not in fear but in warning, the small pressure that meant don't, not yet, we don't know the rules of this place. And Harry, who had learned over 3 years to read that pressure as surely as he read the pull beneath his breastbone, shut his mouth and let the house decide what it would do with him. It decided by opening the floor. What lay beneath number 12, Grimmauld Place, was not a cellar. It was the house's true size. The thing the narrow London townhouse above was only the visible door of, and it ran down into the dark for gallery after gallery, a buried palace folded into the space behind a single front door the way the blood road had folded distance into a corridor. The floor of the kitchen had not broken. It had opened, the black flags drawing apart like the pupil of an eye onto a stair, and the stair drew Harry down, and Hermione came with him because nothing in any world would have made her do otherwise. and they descended through galleries hung with green fire and chains that held nothing, past walls where the portraits of dead blacks turned their painted heads to watch the living air pass, down and down to the deepest gallery of all, where the cold had no temperature and the dark had a weight, and at the gallery's far end, on a seat that no mason had cut and no smith had forged, something shone. It was made of a black that did not drink light but gave back a black light, a darkness that shone, and it was faceted like an enormous heart, the size of a standing stone, and deep inside it something turned, slow and ancient and aware. Hermione stopped at the foot of the stair with her hand pressed to her own breastbone and her clever face stripped for once of every answer. The cor atrum, she whispered, and Harry did not ask how she knew the name because he knew it too. It rose in him from the same dark the blood call had risen from. The Black Heart, Harry, it's the ward, the whole house, the fortune, the blood roads, the bindings, everything, it's all anchored to this. This is what your family guarded for 1,000 years. This is what the name was for. Her voice dropped. And it's been failing, look at it, look how slow it turns. A ward this old has to be held by a living will, and there's been no lord to hold it in 12 years, only a man in a cell too far gone to reach it. It's been dying down here in the dark, alone, holding the whole house up out of habit, waiting for an heir, said the heart of the House of Black. It did not speak in words. It spoke the way the blood call had written in Harry's skin, by admitting meaning into them, and the meaning it admitted now was a question, and the question was so old and so heavy that Harry staggered under it, because it was the question the house had been asking the dark for 12 years and never once been answered. Who will hold me? Harry stood at the foot of the stair in the killing cold with the Black Heart's attention on him like a hand on his chest, and he understood that this was the test Sirius had warned him of, the weighing, the moment the house would reach into him and decide whether he was its heir or a thief in its halls. He did not run. He had nowhere to run to and no wish to. He had spent his whole life being weighed and found wanting by people who had no right to weigh him, and he was not, he found, afraid of being weighed by an honest thing at last. I'm Harry, he said to the heart into the cold. Son of Sirius, son of James and Lily, both in all the ways that count. I didn't ask for you. I didn't know you existed until the summer. But you reached into my blood across half of England and called me home, so here I am. Weigh me, I've got nothing to hide. There's been too much hiding in this family already. The heart weighed him. It reached into him the way the basin's third drop had reached, but deeper, all the way down, and Harry felt it pass through every room of him, the cupboard under the stairs and the cold and the years of being no one's. The first time a stag had burst from his wand to save a man he had not yet known was his father, the moment in the dust of the shrieking shack when he had crossed the floor himself. The steady presence at his shoulder, in every memory that mattered, of a girl who had walked into the dark beside him and never once turned back. The heart weighed all of it. And Harry felt the precise instant it reached the bottom of him and found, at the bottom, not pride and not purity and not any of the things his family had spent 1,000 years prizing, but only a boy who had wanted his whole life to belong somewhere and had learned the hard way that belonging was a thing you gave, not a thing you took. You are the heir, said the cor atrum, and the relief in it was so vast that Harry's own eyes stung with a grief that was not his. The blood is thinned and the blood is hidden, and the blood was carried out my door in shame, but it is the senior blood, living and warm, and it has come home, and you do not want me for what I can give you, which is the only kind of will I have ever been safe in the keeping of. Heir of the body, heir of the line. The seat will not pass to you while your father breathes. He is the Lord, broken though he is, and a lord is not unmade until he dies or is unmade by law, but you are the heir, and from this hour my house knows you, and my wards will not strike you, and my doors will open at your blood, and my name is yours to carry into the world. The green fire, which had burned low and dying the whole length of the gallery, roared up all at once into every bracket, no longer guttering, no longer alone, blazing high and clean, and the chains overhead rang against one another like 100 bells, and far above them, somewhere in the waking house, a thing happened that Harry felt though he could not see it. The tapestry began to re-ink itself. The house let them up the way it had drawn them down, and it took them by a different road, because the deep house did not seem to believe in returning anyone the way they had come. They climbed for a long time through galleries no living person had walked in 12 years. The buried palace went up around them in tears, and Harry began to understand that grim old place, the narrow black townhouse the ministry was watching from the street above, was only the doorway, the visible knuckle of a thing that ran down into the London dark for floor after folded floor. There were halls hung with portraits whose painted occupants turned to watch the new heir pass and muttered to one another behind painted hands. There were rooms full of objects that hummed and ticked and watched, dark instruments the purpose of which Hermione catalogued aloud in a low, fascinated voice and forbade either of them to touch. There was a long corridor lined with doors, each marked with a single point of light above it, and Hermione stopped at the foot of it with the breath going out of her. "Their names," she said. "Look, each door's a name and the light's a constellation. That one's Sirius, Canis Major, the dog star, and that's Regulus, the lion. Every black who ever lived has a door, and the light burns if she did the arithmetic of it, and her voice dimmed if they're alive. Look how few are lit, Harry." He looked down the whole long corridor, among hundreds of dark doors. Perhaps a dozen lights burned, and most of them burned low, a house of the dead with a handful of the living scattered through it like the last embers of a great fire. And one door far down the corridor burned a sullen smoking green unlike any of the others, a green that strained against itself, a door that did not want to be looked at. And Harry felt the house flinch from his attention when it touched it, and decided with an instinct he was already learning to trust that he would come back to that door when he understood the house better, and not before. It was on the third tier that Walburga's portrait found them again, not the screaming canvas at the head of the upstairs hall, but a smaller one, older, hung in a gallery of the family's dead, and this Walburga did not shriek. She watched Harry come, her black eyes narrow, and when he drew level she spoke, and her painted voice was almost worse for being quiet. "It let you up," she said, "the deep house. It tested your blood and it let you walk its halls. I felt it." Her mouth twisted. "A half-blood. In the galleries my mother's mother walked. I've spent 12 years in the dark down here telling the empty rooms that the line would die clean rather than fall to filth, and the house has gone and proved me a liar in a single night." She leaned forward in her frame. "But hear me, boy, the house chooses what it can keep. It is dying, and a dying thing will swallow anything to live one more season, even you, even her. Do not mistake being swallowed for being loved." "I don't need it to love me," Harry said. He had stopped, and Hermione had stopped beside him, and he found that the portrait's malice did not reach him the way it would have a year ago, because he had spent his whole life being told by relatives that he was nothing, and he had learned the exact weight of that particular poison and built a callus over it. "I spent 13 years being swallowed by a family that didn't love me, and I survived it. So whatever this house wants from me, I'll survive that too. The difference is that this one chose me, and yours never did, and you can call it desperation if it makes the dark easier. I'm still the one with a name on the tree, and you're still a painting that nobody comes to see." Walburga Black opened her mouth and found, for once, nothing in it, and Harry walked on, and Hermione fell into step beside him with a look on her face he had not seen before, not the fierce focus he knew, but something quieter and more startled, as though she had just watched him become, in the greenlit dark, a degree more than the boy she had walked into the castle beside 3 years ago. "You've changed," she said, "since the summer, since the basin. You used to take it, the cruelty, the people who decided you were nothing. You just take it and go quiet. You don't go quiet anymore." "No," Harry agreed. I think he considered it, the way he was learning to consider the things she handed him. "I think it's because for the first time there's something underneath me. A floor, a name they can't burn off, a father who'd swim an ocean, a house that reached across England to call me home, you." He glanced at her. "It's hard to make someone feel like nothing when they've finally got proof there's something. That's all the cruelty ever was, really. People telling you you're nothing and you having no evidence to the contrary. I've got evidence now." And the house, as if it had been listening, and it was always listening, warmed the green fire a half-shade brighter the length of the gallery, and drew them on up the last stair toward the room where the thing it most wanted them to see was waiting. They found it on the first floor after the house had let them up, the great living tapestry of the House of Black that had recorded every name of the family for 1,000 years and burned off every name the family hated. It hung the whole length of a long room, a tree of gold thread on green, and as Harry and Hermione came into the room they saw it moving, threads creeping and nodding in the dim light, the house writing into its own memory the thing that had just changed. There was a scorch mark on it, low on the trunk, the size of a fist, a place where a name had been burned off by a mother's wand. "Sirius," it had said once. Harry could see the ghost of the letters under the char, and as he watched, the char began to fade, the scorch healing over, the gold thread creeping back into the burned place letter by letter, because the house had a lord again whether his mother's portrait liked it or not, and a house that has its lord does not leave him burned off its tree. And beneath the healing name in fresh gold thread, a new name was nodding itself into being, stitch by stitch, the first name the black tapestry had added in 13 years. Harry James. Harry stood in front of the tapestry and watched his own name written into a family tree he had not known he belonged to until June, watched the gold thread tie him to the healing scorch above him, and through it to 1,000 years of stars and cruelty in the few, the very few, who had been kind, and he found he could not speak for a moment because he had wanted this to be written somewhere, to be on someone's tree, to be a name a house would not let burn. He had wanted it his whole life without ever once being able to say it aloud. "There you are," Hermione said softly beside him. She had come to stand at his shoulder, and she had read the tapestry the way she read everything, fast and whole, and she had understood what it meant to him before he had finished understanding it himself. "There you are, Harry, on the tree, where they can't burn you off." "There I am," Harry said. It was all either of them said. It was enough. Some things did not want answering, they only wanted a witness, and they had long since become each other's. And then Hermione's eye caught something else on the tapestry, and her whole posture changed. Andromeda, she said. She was pointing at another scorch mark higher on the tree, older than Sirius's, a name burned off so long ago the char had gone gray. Look, the threads run on past it. The blacks burned her off, but the line kept going. There's a name below the scorch, faint, never fully removed because she had a child after she was disowned, and the tree records blood whatever the family wants. Andromeda Black, burned off for marrying a muggle born. And her daughter, Hermione, leaned in, reading the faint gold, Nymphadora Tonks. They're alive, Harry, both of them. There are living blacks the family threw away, and the tree never quite let go of them because blood is blood whatever you carve over it. She straightened, and the cold focus had come back into her face. The look that meant a problem had shown its true shape. We're not as alone as Sirius thinks. There's a whole branch of this family that got burned for exactly the same crime they'll burn us for not being pure enough, for loving the wrong people. And they're out there. And they might just possibly be on our side. You think we need allies, Harry said. I think, said Hermione, that we are two 13-year-olds, one escaped convict, a house full of dark old magic, and a goblin's basin against the entire ministry, the Wisengamot, and whoever sent that owl to Malfoy Manor. And I think the goblin told us the truth in the summer when he said there are houses that would love you dead. So yes, Harry. I think we are going to need every living soul in Britain who has ever been told by this family that they don't belong, because those are exactly the people who will understand why it matters that the House of Black just chose a half-blood and let a muggle-born girl walk its halls without striking her down. Her chin came up, starting with the ones whose names it never quite managed to burn. They went back to Sirius by the Blood Road, and Harry told his father about the tree. He had not known how to begin in the earth dark of the den, with his father's gaunt face turned up to him in the green light that still clung to Harry's skin from the deep house. So he had simply said it plain. Your name's back on the tapestry. The scorch is healing, the threads are growing back over where your mother burned you off, and mine's underneath it. Harry James, the house wrote me onto the tree. Sirius Black went very still. For a long moment he did not speak, and Harry watched something move across the ruin of his face that he had no name for, the look of a man who had spent 27 years being the boy his mother burned off the family tree, and had just learned that the tree had grown him back. When Sirius did speak, his ruined voice had gone rough in a new way. She burned me off the summer I turned 16, he said. I stood in the hall and watched her do it, watched my own name go black under her wand, and I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I'd wanted it. I'd run to James's people, and they were my real family, and a scorch on a tapestry meant nothing. He looked at his hands. I told myself that for 27 years, Harry. And it turns out I was lying the whole time, because you've just told me the house grew my name back, and I find I can hardly breathe. He looked up, and his gray eyes were wet, and he did not bother to hide it. And it put you under me, on the tree. My son's name nodded to mine where the whole family can see it. That's the thing I never let myself want in 13 years of not being allowed to be sure you existed, to have you written somewhere as mine. And the house has gone and done it without asking either of us. A wrecked ghost of a laugh, vile poisonous place, first decent thing it's done in 1,000 years. There's more, Harry said, and told him about Andromeda. The change in Sirius was immediate, and it was the first wholly young thing Harry had seen in him, a flare of something bright and grieving and glad all at once. Andromeda, he breathed. Merlin, Dromeda. She was the only one of my cousins worth a nut, the only one who got out, who married for love and let them burn her for it, the way they burned me. I haven't heard her name they didn't even let me write in Azkaban, and before that I was on the run. He stopped, and the gladness guttered. She'll think I did it, Harry, like everyone. She'll think I killed James and Lily. She got burned off the same tree as me, but she'll have read the same papers as everyone else, and she'll have spent 12 years believing her runaway cousin grew up to be a murderer. Then we tell her the truth, Hermione said, from the tunnel mouth where she had taken up the watch as she always did, and we give her a reason to believe it. The goblins have the blood on record, the tapestries healed your name. And there's a petition no one's filed yet, but everyone can see coming. Malfoy's going to come for this estate, and when he does, every black the family ever threw away has a stake in it, because if a Malfoy gets the seat, the first thing that seat will do is finish carving them out of existence. Her jaw set. Andromeda Tonks was burned off for marrying a muggle-born and having a half-blood daughter. We are a half-blood heir and a muggle-born girl the house chose anyway. She's exactly the ally we need, Mr. Black, and we are exactly the cause she's been waiting 12 years for someone to give her. We just have to reach her before Malfoy does. They reached her by owl, and by the one currency Hermione had judged a disowned daughter of the House of Black would trust above any letter, a thread from the tapestry. The house gave it up reluctantly. Harry had to ask the Cor Atrum directly and feel its ancient suspicion before a single strand of the healing gold would come loose into his hand, but it came, and Hermione folded it into a letter she drafted 4 times before she would send it, a letter that said almost nothing and proved almost everything. Your name was never fully burned. The tree kept your blood when the family threw it away. The house has woken, it has an heir, and the heir would be glad of his cousin. The thread is the proof. Come to the place you'll know how to find if you want to see your family's tree grow back. Andromeda Tonks came on the third night, and she came armed. She arrived not by the front door, she was too clever and too long disowned for that, but by a side passage of the blood road that her own remembered blood still opened to her, and she came into the deep kitchen with her wand drawn and her face set, a tall, handsome woman with heavy-lidded gray eyes that were unsettlingly like the woman in the screaming portrait, and unsettlingly unlike her, because where Walburga's eyes held cruelty, Andromeda's held a wary, weathered intelligence that took in Harry and Hermione and the green fire and the watching house in a single sweep and missed nothing. "Show me," she said without preamble. "The thread proves the house woke. It doesn't prove anything about who woke it. Show me the heir and show me the tree," and then, her voice did not soften, but it changed. "Then you can tell me why a half-blood child and a muggle-born girl are standing in the kitchen my great-aunt died in, calling themselves the heirs of the most blood-mad family in Britain." So they showed her. They took her up to the tapestry, and Andromeda Tonks stood in front of the great tree and saw her own name, gray and half-burned and never quite removed, and below it her daughter's, and across the trunk the healing scorch where Sirius was growing back, and beneath it, in fresh gold, Harry James. And Harry watched a woman who had not, he suspected, let herself be undone by anything in 12 hard years come very close, in the green light, to being undone. "He didn't do it," Harry said while she was still looking at the tree. "My father, Sirius. He didn't kill my parents, he didn't kill James and Lily, and he isn't only my godfather, he's my father by blood, by right they swore to keep me safe, and it's written in a goblin's basin and it's written on this tree. And the man rotting in Azkaban for 13 years for a murder he didn't commit is your cousin, and he's 2 miles from here, and he is the only family I've got left who's free, and the ministry wants to take his soul." His voice had gone unsteady, and he let it. "I'm not asking you to believe me because I'm asking nicely. I'm asking you to look at that tree and ask yourself whether the family that burned you off for loving a muggle-born would ever in 1,000 years have let me and Hermione stand here alive, and then ask yourself what it means that the house did it anyway." Andromeda Tonks looked at the tree for a long time. "Ted always said," she said at last, very quietly, "that the cruelest thing about my family wasn't that they hated. It was that they were so certain, they never once doubted they were right to burn me. They burned me with a clear conscience, and they slept well after." She turned, and her weathered gray eyes were wet and absolutely steady. "And here is this house, this vile, certain, blood-mad house, doing the one thing none of them ever did, doubting, choosing a half-blood, letting a muggle-born girl stand under its tapestry, growing my name back." She drew a breath. "If the House of Black has learned to doubt after 1,000 years, then perhaps I can be persuaded to doubt the thing I've believed about my cousin for 12. Tell me everything, from the beginning." And then children, and now at last something in the set of her shoulders eased, and an ally was born in the green light. "Then we are going to talk about the Wisengamot, because I was raised in that family. I know exactly how these people think, and I promise you the move they make next will be cold and legal and far cleverer than anything you've planned for." She was right within the week. The summons to the Wisengamot came 4 days later, and it did not come to Harry. It came to the offices of Gringotts, and to the desk of a goblin who did not own the truths he kept but did not forget them either, addressed to the estate of the most ancient and noble House of Black, and it was a petition of escheat. Hermione read the word aloud 3 times before she would believe a thing so cold could be written so politely, filed by the House of Malfoy, praying that the senior line of Black be declared extinct in law. The imprisoned Sirius Black being a convicted felon civilly dead and without lawful issue, and that the estate, the seat, and the name passed to the nearest pure and untainted blood, namely the line of Narcissa, née Black, wife of Lucius Malfoy, in the person of their son and heir Draco. "Civilly dead," Harry said. "What does that mean, civilly dead?" "He's right there, he's alive, he's under a tree 2 miles from here. It means the law has decided to treat him as dead because he's a convicted felon serving a life sentence," Hermione said. Her voice had gone flat and precise and furious. "It means that as far as the Wisengamot is concerned, your father might as well be in the ground, and a dead man's estate passes to his heirs, and Malfoy is arguing that there are no lawful heirs because the only one is you. Half-blood concealed under a muggle-born's protection charm. Born of a right, Malfoy's petition calls." She found the line and read it, and her hand tightened on the parchment until it crumpled. "A fraud upon the blood, a base-born concealment unworthy of an ancient and noble house." She looked up, and her eyes were bright and hard. "He's not arguing you don't exist, Harry. He's cleverer than that. The goblins have the blood on record, and he knows it. He's arguing that you exist and don't count. That you're real and tainted, that the magic chose wrong and the law should fix the magic's mistake." Harry was quiet for a moment, looking at the crumpled parchment, at the cold, polite words that wanted to take from him the one thing the house had just given him, the tree, the name, the place where they couldn't burn him off. "Then we don't let the law fix it," he said. "We make the law admit the magic was right." He looked at her. There's a hearing, 6 weeks." The estate has the right to be represented to contest the petition before the Wisengamot. Hermione had gone very still, and Harry recognized the stillness. It was the stillness of her mind moving fastest. And here's the thing Malfoy's counting on, Harry, the thing that makes it so cold and so clever. He's counting on the estate having no one to send. Sirius can't appear, he's a wanted man, he'd be kissed in the doorway. You can't appear, you're a 13-year-old with no legal standing, no guardian, no voice on that floor. So the petition goes uncontested, and an uncontested petition passes, and the House of Black falls into Malfoy's hands without a single word spoken against it. She set the parchment down very carefully on the dusty table of the house that wanted to be theirs. Unless what? Unless the estate has a lord who can speak through a proxy, or an heir old enough to hold standing, or she stopped. Her hand had drifted without her seeming to notice to her own breastbone, to the place where a thing she had told a goblin had not woken had been waking quietly, insistently, since the night the stag and the otter had run together across the dark. Or some other claim the law has to hear, an older claim, a deeper one. She frowned. The heart said something to you in the gallery. When it weighed you, I felt it through your hand. It said you were the heir of the body, but it said the seat wouldn't pass while Sirius lived, and then it said something else, didn't it? Something it didn't finish, something about the house answered her before Harry could. It answered the way it had opened the floor, without asking, the green fire in the brackets of the long tapestry room flaring all at once, and the Cor Atram's voice rising up through the floors from the deep gallery, cold and ancient and certain, into the minds of both of them at once, because they were standing together and the house had stopped some time in the last 4 days, distinguishing between them. The seat is too heavy for a child, said the heart of the House of Black. It was always too heavy for one. A dying line that crowns an heir too young or too alone does not trust the child to bear it. There is an older provision from the house's strongest age before the family grew proud and forgot it. The blood reaches past the heir when the heir stands alone against the dark, and it seeks an anchor, a second will, already bound to the heir's own by trial and by trust, to share the weight the seat would otherwise break him under, to stand where he cannot stand, to hold what he cannot hold. To be in law and in blood the heirs bonded equal in the house. The green fire steadied, the cold drew back. And the heart of the House of Black, which had reached into Harry's blood across half of England and found its heir, turned its great ancient attention, for the first time, fully and only onto the girl standing at his shoulder, the muggle-born girl in the school jumper, the one creature had called filth and Walburga had called pollution, the one who had walked every dark beside Harry and never once turned back, and had asked the question it had been circling since the night the otter ran beside the stag. When the heir's blood woke, girl, something woke in you. You have called it a dream. You have told it to a goblin's face that it did not happen. Will you go on lying to my house, in my house, with my heir's hand in yours, or will you turn at last and look at the thing that has been reaching for you since the summer? And Hermione Granger, who had built her whole self on not believing in omens, who had braced her whole life to be told she did not belong, went very white and very still in the green light of a house that had no reason in 1,000 years to want her, and did not this time call it a dream. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Hermione, bonded heir Hermione, did not answer the house that night. She did a far more frightening thing. She went home to the clean, bright house in Hampstead, and she sat on her bedroom floor with every book she owned spread around her in a ring, and she tried to read her way out of the thing that was happening to her, the way she had read her way out of everything since she was 6 years old and frightened and clever and alone. It did not work. That was the first time in her life it had ever failed her. She found the bond in the books in the end, not by that name, the books were too cautious to name it plainly, but she found its shape, in 3 separate grimoires and a footnote in a treatise on old magical law, and the shape was always the same. A house too old and too proud, brought to the edge of extinction, crowning an heir too young or too alone to bear its weight. And the heir's magic reaching out in the moment of crowning for an anchor, not a thing the house made, the footnote was very clear about this, but a thing the house found, a bond already half-grown between 2 living wills, and the crowning only finishing what trust and trial had begun. The books called it, when they dared to call it anything, the conjunction of the quick, the living equal, the second will bound to the first, sharing the seat too heavy for one. And every single text agreed on the part that made Hermione put the book down and press both hands flat to the floorboards to stop them shaking. The bond could not be forced. It could only be recognized. The magic did not choose 2 strangers and tie them together. It reached into the heir's life and found the one will already braided so tightly to his own that the house could not tell, looking at the 2 of them, where one left off and the other began, and it named that. It did not create the bond. It witnessed it. It put a 1,000-year-old name to a thing that had been quietly, stubbornly true for years before any house came reaching. Which meant, and here Hermione, who had built her entire self on the cold comfort that magic might choose her but never love her, had to set the book down a second time, which meant the house had not chosen her. It had found her. It had reached into Harry Potter's blood and traced the strongest thread in his whole life, and the thread had led, every time without exception, to her. She sat on the floor of her bedroom for a long time in the ring of her books, the cleverest witch of her age, and let herself understand that she had spent 3 years being afraid of the wrong thing. She had been afraid of being unchosen. She had braced every day to be told she did not belong. And the truth, surfacing now out of 3 grimoires and a footnote in a place under her own breastbone that had been waking since the otter ran beside the stag, was so far outside that brace that she did not have a coat for it, that she had already belonged for years to the one person whose belonging she had never once doubted, and that 1,000-year-old house had simply noticed before she had let herself. "Oh," said Hermione Granger to her empty bedroom very quietly. She went back to the house the next night and she told it the truth, because she was, above all things, a person who told the truth once she had reasoned her way to it. "Something woke in me," she said, standing in the deep gallery at the foot of the stair with Harry beside her and the core atrum turning slow and black and shining at the gallery's end. The morning Harry's blood woke, I felt it, a cold, a turning, a door giving somewhere far down, and a word I didn't say in my own voice. Chosen. And I told a goblin it hadn't happened, and I told myself it was a dream, and I was lying both times because the truth frightened me more than any monster I've ever faced." Her chin came up the way it did when she had decided a thing and braced to defend it. "I've read everything I could find. I know what you are now. I know you can't force this, that you didn't reach across England and pick a stranger and tie her to your heir against her will. You found a thing that was already there. You found," her voice caught once and she let it and went on, "you found that I was already his, that I have been for years, and you put your old terrible name to it. You understand then," said the heart of the House of Black, and there was something in it that was almost gentle, which was the most frightening thing the house had done yet. "Most do not. Most believe the bond is a chain I forge. It is not. I have no power to braid 2 wills that are not already braiding themselves. I'm old girl and I am dying, and the one mercy of dying is that it has burned the lies out of me, and so I will tell you the truth your books were too cautious to tell. I did not reach for the cleverest witch in Britain because she was clever. I reached for the will already wound through my heirs, and it happened to be the cleverest witch in Britain, and the family I served for 1,000 years would have died before it. Let that be true. That is the whole of it. The bond chose itself. I only have the eyes to see it." "And if I say yes," Hermione said, "what does it make me?" "It makes you what you already are, with the law and the blood behind it at last." The heart turned and the green fire steadied the length of the gallery. "The heir holds the voice, the will of the house, the hand upon the wards, the word that the world must answer. The anchor holds the loom, the memory and the law, the ledger of every name and debt and judgment the house has ever kept. He reaches into the world, you keep the world's account of him. He is the house's will, you are the house's law. Lady of the most ancient and noble house of Black, bonded heir, equal in the seat, not beneath him, never beneath him. The seat was always meant for 2, and the proud forgot it, and that forgetting was the whole long story of my fall." A pause, and the great cold attention narrowed fully and only onto her. "I will not pretend it is a gift without a price. The world will hate you for it more than it hates him. A half-blood heir they can call a tragedy. A muggle-born lady of an ancient and noble house they will call a war. Know that before you answer. I will not crown you in ignorance the way my family crowned its sons." Hermione looked at Harry. It was the thing she would remember afterward, not the answer, but the looking. She had braced her whole life to be chosen or unchosen by forces that did not consult her, and here was the oldest, darkest force she had ever stood before, and the first thing it had done was tell her the cost and let her decide. And the second thing, the thing that mattered more, was that the boy whose will the house had found braided through her own was not telling her what to do either. Harry stood at her shoulder in the green light and looked back at her, and there was no pressure in his face, no wanting, only the steadiness she had trusted above her own courage for 3 years, and under the steadiness a question he would never have spoken aloud and that she heard anyway. "Only if you want it. Only ever if you want it." "I've been told no my whole life," Hermione said to the house, but looking at Harry. "By people who should have said yes. I've been called a word in this very kitchen by a creature that thinks I'm filth, and I've been called it on the train and in the corridors and to my face by boys who learned it from their fathers, and every single time I've reasoned my way past it and kept walking, because I decided a long time ago that I would not let people who were wrong about me decide what I was." Her eyes were bright and hard and absolutely steady. "And now the oldest, proudest, purest house in Britain has reached past 1,000 years of its own blood and found me already braided to its heir, and it's asking me, asking, not telling, whether I'll take the name, after a lifetime of being told I don't belong." Her chin came up one final time. "I'm not going to be the one who says no. I've had enough of no to last me 100 years. Yes, I'll take the loom. I'll keep your law. Crown me." The house took the word the way the sea takes a stone. The bonding was not a wedding, though Hermione would spend a fair amount of the following week firmly correcting Sirius on exactly that point. It was older than weddings and stranger, and it asked nothing of either of them but truth. The core atrum drew them both to the foot of its seat, and the cold came up out of the floor, and the star-glass blazed its impossible black light, and the green fire roared into every bracket the length of the gallery at once. And then the house did the thing it had been waiting 12 years to do. It reached into the bond that was already there, the braid of 2 wills grown together over 3 years of trolls and basilisks and dark beneath the school, and it did not tie it tighter. It made it visible. A thread of light spun up out of Harry's breastbone, where the blood call had burned, and a thread of light spun up out of Hermione's, where the thing she had called a dream had woken, and the two threads, one the deep starless black of the black blood, one a quick bright silver that was only and entirely her own, wound together in the air between them, and did not merge and did not surrender, but braided, black and silver, each itself, each holding into a single cord that bound the air and the anchor and the seat. And the loom came down on Hermione the way the name had come down on Harry. She felt it arrive, the whole living memory of the House of Black, every name and every debt and every judgment of 1,000 years, the tapestry and the ledgers and the law, laying itself into her keeping all at once, and for one terrible instant the weight of it was past bearing. 1,000 years of grief and pride and cruelty pouring into a 13-year-old Muggle-born girl who had asked for it with her eyes open. And Hermione Granger, who had never in her life met a thing she could not learn, set her feet and squared her shoulders under a crown of soot and starlight and learned it. She let the loom settle. She let the names move into her keeping. She felt the ledger open in her, the whole cold catalogue of the house's debts and judgments, and she did not flinch from it because she had decided, somewhere on the floor of her bedroom in the ring of her books, that if she was going to keep the law of a blood-mad house, then she was going to be the best keeper of law it had ever had, and remake it, name by name, into something that had learned at last to doubt. The light reached its height and held Harry crowned in the voice and Hermione crowned in the loom, black thread and silver braided between them. The seat full for the first time in 12 years, and full as it was meant to be, by 2, and then it ebbed, the way a tide goes out, and the gallery was only a gallery again, cold black stone and a shining heart, and 2 children standing hand in hand where no children had any right to stand. "Right," said Hermione Granger, lady of the most ancient and noble House of Black, into the greenlit dark, in a voice that shook only a little. "Now show me the ledgers, all of them. If I'm the law of this house, I want to know exactly what laws I've inherited, and I have a very strong feeling, Harry, that somewhere in 1,000 years of accounts there is going to be something nobody wanted us to find." Sirius wept when they told him, which Hermione had not expected, and then he laughed, which she had expected even less, and then he did the thing that undid her, which was to take her hand in both of his ruined ones and bow over it, gravely, the way the heir of an ancient and noble house would bow to its lady, an absurd courtly gesture from a gaunt fugitive in prison rags in the dark under a willow tree. "My son's bonded lady," Sirius said, straightening, and there was a brightness in his gray eyes that had no Azkaban in it at all. "A Muggle-born lady of the most ancient and noble House of Black." He laughed again, helplessly, joyously, the laugh of a man savoring a revenge 13 years in the cellar. "Do you have any idea at all, what my mother would do if she could see this? She burned me off the tree for befriending the wrong sort. She'd have burned the whole house down to keep a Muggle-born off her precious seat. And the house, her blood, her 1,000 years of Towger's purr has gone and crowned one anyway, and there's not a single thing her screaming portrait can do but watch." He wiped his face with the back of his hand, unashamed. "I have spent 13 years thinking the House of Black was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And it turns out the old monster had one good choice left in it, right at the end, and it spent it on the 2 of you. Welcome to the family, Hermione, such as it is, such as we're going to make it. It's not a wedding, Mr. Black," Hermione said, because someone had to be precise, and it was always her, and her ears had gone faintly pink. "The bond. I've read everything on it, and it is categorically not it's a magical legal co-heirship, a shared sovereignty. It has nothing to do with—" "Of course it doesn't," said Sirius gravely. "It's about the seat, and the law, and not letting the line die, that's all." "That's all," Sirius agreed, with the particular grave solemnity of a man who had been 13 years old once himself, and remembered exactly how it went. And Harry, beside her, was studying the ceiling of the den with great interest and a tide of red climbing his neck, and Hermione decided, with the firmness of a lady ruling on a point of law, that the conversation was concluded. But she did not let go of Harry's hand, and Sirius noticed that she did not, and said nothing about it, which was, Harry thought, the kindest thing his father had done yet. The loom did not come with instructions, and Hermione, who had never in her life been handed a body of knowledge without a book to organize it, spent her first days as lady of the House of Black learning to read a library that had no spine and no index, and 1,000 years of authors who had all hated each other. It was not, she discovered, a thing she knew, it was a thing she could know, all of it, any of it, the way a person standing in a vast dark archive can find any document if only they know where to reach. Every name the family had ever recorded, every debt it had ever called in, every judgment it had ever passed, every marriage it had brokered, every law it had laid into its own foundation across 10 centuries of pride. It was all there, held in the cold, bright weight under her breastbone, and the terrible thing about it, the thing that kept her awake the first 3 nights, was that it was hers to change, not just to read, to amend. The lady of the house did not merely keep the law, She was the living edge of it, the place where 1,000-year-old law met the present and could be made to bend. Too much power for one person, she told Harry on the second night in the tapestry room, surrounded by the great tree with all its names. Do you understand? I could rewrite 1,000 years of judgments. I could call in debts owed by families who have forgotten they owe them. I could, Harry, I held it up against the law that disinherited Andromeda, and I could feel that I had the authority to simply reverse it by myself with a thought, and the house would obey, because I'm the lady and the law is mine to keep. Her hands were not quite steady. That's not justice, that's just a different person holding the whip. The blacks were monsters because one person got to decide what the law meant and everyone else had to live inside it, and now that one person is me. How is that better? Because I'm clever. Bellatrix was clever. Cleverness isn't the thing that was missing. Harry thought about it, the way he had learned to think about the things she brought him that had no easy floor. Then don't hold it alone, he said. That's the whole point of us, isn't it? That's what the heart said. The seat's too heavy for one, and they kept giving it to one anyway, and it made monsters. So don't be the one person who decides what the law means. He nodded at the tree. Be two. Make it so the loom can't move without the voice agreeing, and the voice can't move without the loom. Make it so neither of us can be a monster by ourselves, because the law won't bend for one of us, only for both. You're scared of having too much power, so build the thing that means you never hold it alone. Hermione looked at him for a long moment, and then she did the thing she did when he had said something better than he knew, which was to go very still and stare at him as though he had grown a second head. That's Harry, that's actually a constraint I could build into the foundational law. A check. The two crowns balanced against each other, so that the deepest changes need both, and neither of us can become what this family became, because the law itself won't let one will rule it. She was already reaching into the loom, already shaping it, the fear transmuting into work the way it always did. It's almost the opposite of everything the blacks believed. They thought power should be concentrated, purest blood, single lord, absolute. And we're going to take their 1,000-year engine and rebuild it so that it can only ever be held by two people who trust each other enough to share it. A breath, almost a laugh. They'd hate that more than the half-blood and the muggle-born. We're not just sitting in their seat, we're changing what the seat is for. Creature, who had been listening from the doorway as he always was, made a small strangled sound, and when Hermione looked up, the old elf was not glaring. He was watching her shape the law with an expression she could not read, 200 years of a creature who had only ever known the law as a thing that was done to him, watching it become, for the first time, a thing that might be done with care. The young lady changes the deep law, Creature said, and it was not quite an accusation. Lords change the law. Lords always change the law to suit themselves, to burn off the ones they hated. The young lady changes it so that she cannot suit herself. He shuffled closer, peering at the tree, at the unburned names. Creature does not understand it. Creature does not understand any of it. A pause, and his cracked voice dropped. But Master Regulus tried to do one good thing with this house at the end, and it killed him, and no one ever knew. Creature thinks Master Regulus would have understood it. Creature thinks he would have liked the young lady. That is all Creature has to say. And he shuffled away, muttering before she could answer, but he left, again, a cup of tea at her elbow, and this time there were two, one for the lady and one for the lord, and Hermione understood that the thaw had become something that no longer needed a name. Andromeda Tonks taught them the law, because somebody had to, and she was the only one left alive who had been raised inside the family and lived to despise it cleanly. She came to the house 3 evenings a week. By the blood road her remembered blood still opened, and she sat them down at the long table in the tapestry room and drilled them in the cold machinery of the Wisengamot the way a dueling master drills footwork. Not the spirit of the law, which she said was a sentimental fiction, but the gears of it, the procedure, the precedent, the precise sequence of words by which an ancient body of robed wizards decided whose blood counted and whose did not. Understand what you're walking into, she said on the first night, her heavy-lidded gray eyes moving from Harry to Hermione and back. The Wisengamot is not a court of truth, it is a court of standing. It does not ask what is true. It asks who has the right to speak, and it has spent 1,000 years making very sure that the people with the right to speak are the people who already have everything. A 13-year-old half-blood has no standing. An escaped convict has less than none, civilly dead, voiceless. Lucius Malfoy has built his entire petition on the certainty that the estate of Black will walk into that chamber with no mouth the law is obliged to hear. She let that sit. And then there is you, Hermione. Me, said Hermione. You. Andromeda almost smiled. Because here is the thing my clever cousin-in-law has overlooked. In his certainty that no Black would ever crown a mudblood, forgive me, I use the word as they will use it, so that you are not surprised by it on the floor, and that is that the conjunction of the quick is not a sentiment. It is a magical legal instrument older than the Wisengamot itself, and when the house crowns a bonded lady, it does not merely give her a pretty title, it gives her standing, co-sovereign of the estate. A living, adult in-law voice for the House of Black, with the full right to appear, to contest, and to speak on the floor, a right that does not depend on age, because the bond confers the standing of the seat itself, and the seat is 1,000 years old. Her eyes glinted. Lucius is preparing to argue against an estate with no voice. He is going to walk into that chamber and find the voice is a 14-year-old muggle-born girl with the law of the House of Black at her back and 6 weeks of my teaching in her head. I would pay a great deal of gold to see his face. Hermione had gone very still, and Harry watched the whole shape of it arrive in her at once. The thing she had been the morning the hat took too long over her head, the thing she had been told she was not, becoming, by the law of the very house that should have hated her most, the one person in Britain who could stand on the floor of the Wisengamot and speak for them all. Then teach me, Hermione said, everything, every line of inheritance law, every precedent, every trick. If I'm the only voice this house has got, I'm going to be the best voice it's ever had, and when Lucius Malfoy stands up to argue that the magic chose wrong, I'm going to take his own law and hand it back to him sharp end first. That, said Andromeda Tonks, opening the first of a great many books, is precisely the spirit in which I was burned off the tree. We are going to get along. Hermione had promised there would be something in the ledgers that nobody wanted them to find. She was nearly always right. It would have been better this once for all of them if she had been wrong. Creature brought her the ledgers because the house made him, and he brought them the way a man brings poison to someone he has been forbidden to refuse, with his eyes down and his hands shaking, and a low, ceaseless mutter under his breath that Hermione, to her own surprise, found she could no longer quite hate. She had expected to hate him. He had called her filth in the kitchen her first hour in the house. But she held the loom now, and the loom held every name, and among the names it held was Creature's, and what she saw when she looked at him through the house's memory was not a monster but a wound. 200 years of an old creature's whole soul poured into a family that had given him in return exactly one kindness in all that time. A young master named Regulus who had been good to him once and had died, and after whom the elf had been quietly, hopelessly grieving for 15 years while the world called him vicious. It was difficult to hate a wound once you had seen it was a wound. Hermione, who had spent her life being told she was less than human by people who had never bothered to look at her, found she had less appetite than she expected for telling anyone else they were less than human. You don't have to call me that word, she told him, the first night over the ledgers, not gently, because Creature would have heard gentleness as weakness, but plainly. You can call me Lady, or you can call me Granger, or you can call me nothing at all and just bring the books. But you're not going to call me the other thing in this house again, and not because I order it, though I could, but because I've read what your family did to you, Creature. Every name of it's in the loom now, and I think you've had enough of being told what you're worth by people who were wrong. I know I have, so we're going to stop doing it to each other. Creature had stared at her with his huge bloodshot eyes and said nothing and brought the books, but he had not called her the word again, and on the third night, without a word, he had brought her a cup of tea along with the ledgers and set it down at her elbow and shuffled away muttering before she could thank him. And Hermione had understood that something in the wretched creature had begun, very slowly, against 200 years of habit, to thaw. The ledgers themselves were a horror and an education. 1,000 years of a family's accounts, the vaults, the properties, the debts owed and owing, the marriages bought and the enemies bribed and the bodies more than once quietly paid for. Hermione read them the way she read everything, fast and whole and merciless, and she built in her head, night by night, a complete and terrible map of the House of Black, what it owned, what it owed, who hated it and why, and where in all that cold arithmetic the levers were that a clever lady might pull. And on the 9th night, deep in the oldest ledger, in a hand she did not know, sealed with a blot of something that was not ink, she found the thing nobody had wanted them to find. It's a writ, Hermione said. Harry had come up the blood road at the urgency in her message, and Sirius with him as the dog, risking the surveillance because the message had said come now, and the three of them stood around the long table in the tapestry room with the oldest ledger open between them and a single page glowing faintly, sullenly, with a light that did not want to be read. A legal instrument lodged in the deep law of the house itself, not in the ministry in the house, in the core Atrim's own keeping, which means it has force whether the ministry knows it or not. Hermione's voice had gone flat and precise and very cold. It was lodged 13 years ago, just before, she glanced at Sirius, just before everything. By a daughter of the senior line who knew, even then, that the family was dying, and who made provision against the day, she read the writ's own words, and her mouth thinned, against the day, the seat should fall to any blood that is not pure, by accident of magic, by fraud of concealment, or by the failing of the line into base and mongrel hands. She looked up. It signed Bellatrix. The name dropped into the green-lit room and lay there. Bella, Sirius said softly. Dog had become a man without Harry seeing it happen, and Sirius Black's gaunt face had gone the color of the dust on the table. My cousin, Bellatrix Lestrange. She's in Azkaban, has been since before me. She went down for what she did to the Longbottoms. She's the maddest and the cruelest of all of us, and that is a sentence I do not say lightly about my own family. If Bella lodged a writ in the deep law 13 years ago, Harry, she was the truest believer the blood purity madness ever produced. She loved the darkness of this family more than she loved her own soul. If she wrote something into the house against the day, an impure heir might take the seat. Then she wrote it against us, Harry said. Exactly us, a half-blood heir and a muggle-born lady. She wrote a curse 13 years ago aimed at the precise thing we've just become. Not a curse, Hermione said. Worse than a curse, a claim. She turned the ledger so they could see the sullen, glowing page. A curse you could break. This is a writ of blood, a legal magical instrument that says, in effect, that if the seat ever falls to impure blood, the claim of the purest living black supersedes it. It doesn't attack us, it overrides us. It says the magic chose wrong, the same thing Malfoy's petition says, except Malfoy has to argue it in front of the Wisengamot and lose if we're clever, and this thing doesn't have to argue anything because it's written into the house's own law, and the house has to honor its own law even against itself, even against the heir it chose. She drew a breath. It's sleeping. The bonding didn't wake it. I checked. I've spent 2 days checking. It's still sealed, but it's stirring, Harry. I can feel it through the loom, the way you can feel a splinter you can't see. The moment it wakes, the moment the purest living black of the senior line reaches for it, it activates, and it will contest our claim from inside the house with the full force of the house's own 1,000-year law behind it, and there will be nothing the Coratrum can do to stop it, because the Coratrum is the law, and the writ is written into the law. The purest living black of the senior line, Harry repeated slowly. That's who is that, Bellatrix herself. Bellatrix is in Azkaban, said Sirius. Civilly dead like me, she can't reach it. His gray eyes had gone very dark, but her sister can. The room went quiet. Narcissa, Hermione said. Narcissa Malfoy, née Black, sane, free, and the most dangerous person at that table when the owl came in the summer. She closed the ledger very carefully on the sleeping writ. It's the same move, Harry. It was always the same move. Lucius files the petition in the open in front of the Wisengamot to make the legal case that you don't count, and Bellatrix's writ waits in the dark, lodged 13 years ago by a madwoman who saw the whole future, ready to be woken by her sane sister the moment the open case needs a blade behind it. The petition is the hand they're showing. The writ is the knife under the table. And if we beat the petition in front of the Wisengamot, when we beat it, they wake the writ, and it takes the house from inside, and we lose everything we've won in our own home by our own family's law. Harry looked at the closed ledger, at the sullen light still leaking from its edges, at the 13-year-old knife a madwoman had left in the dark for exactly this day. Then we've got 2 things to beat now, he said. Not one, the petition in the open in front of the whole world. And the writ in the dark in the bones of our own house. He looked at his father and at the girl whose silver will was braided to his own black blood, the bonded heir, the lady, the keeper of the law that held the knife. How long have we got before they wake it? Hermione was quiet a moment, and Harry watched her do the arithmetic of it, the fear pressed flat under the cold, steady work of her mind. They'll wake it when they need it, she said, not before. A writ like this you only get to wake once. It's a single irrevocable act, the purest blood claiming the seat against the chosen heir, and you don't waste it. They'll let Lucius run the petition first in the open, because if the open case wins, they never have to show the knife at all. She looked up. Which means the writ wakes at the hearing, Harry, or just after. If we beat Lucius on the floor of the Wisengamot, and we are going to beat him, because I am going to spend the next 6 weeks learning every line of inheritance law ever written, and I am very, very good at this. Then in the moment of our victory, Narcissa Black is going to reach into the deep law of this house and wake her mad sister's knife, and try to take from us by blood what they could not take by argument. Her chin came up, so we don't just have to win the hearing. We have to win it and survive winning it, and have an answer ready for a 13-year-old curse that nobody alive has ever seen woken before. A breath, 6 weeks, we've got 6 weeks. And I think somewhere in this, we are finally going to need your cousin Andromeda's help even more than we already do. Because the one thing that might break a writ that says only the purest blood can claim the seat is another daughter of the senior line, just as pure, who was burned off the tree for choosing love over blood, and who might just be willing to stand up and say so. Far to the south, in a cold green drawing room, Narcissa Malfoy sat very still with a letter from her husband in her hands, and read for the 3rd time the line that mattered, the seat occupied, the heir confirmed. A mudblood crowned beside him as lady of our house, and felt, rising in her, not the fury Lucius had expected, but something colder and far older, the thing her mad sister had planted in her 13 years before like a seed in winter. The certainty that there was a blade left in the dark for exactly this, and that the hour was coming at last to wake it. She did not write back to her husband. She wrote instead a single line to the only authority in Britain that could grant a sane and free daughter of the senior line a supervised audience with a prisoner of Azkaban, and she sealed it with the crest of the House of Black, the crest that was still, for 6 more weeks, legally hers to use. The writ stirred in its 13-year sleep, and waited to be woken by the one hand left in the world with the blood to wake it. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, reclaiming the house they had 6 weeks, a hunted lord, a sleeping knife in the walls, and a house 200 years deep in dust and grief, and Hermione looked at all of it and made a list. We cannot fight a war out of a ruin, she said on the first morning of the rebuilding, standing in the great cold kitchen with the green fire burning low in its brackets and Creature hovering in the doorway pretending not to listen. Malfoy's petition isn't just an attack on Harry's blood. It's an attack on the idea that the House of Black is a living house at all. That's the whole legal theory of Escheat, that the line has failed, that there's nothing here but a dead estate to be divided. So the single most powerful thing we can do before that hearing is make this house indisputably, visibly, magically alive. A house with a lord and heir, a lady working wards, a settled tapestry, and a future. You cannot escheat a house that is plainly living. You can only escheat a corpse. She turned, and there was fire in her now that had nothing to do with the brackets. So we are not cleaning a house, Harry. We are building a case. Every ward we relight, every name we restore, every room we wake, it's evidence. Now, where do we start? With the heart, said Sirius, from the corner where he sat as a man, because the deep house was the one place in Britain he could. The heart meant the wards, and the wards meant the core atrum, and the core atrum meant work that nearly killed them both. A ward anchored to a living will had to be fed by that will, and 12 years of neglect had left the house's wards guttering down to embers, the alarms that would have screamed at an intruder reduced to a murmur, the defenses that had once turned a curse at the door grown thin as old cloth. Harry held the voice the wards answered to him, and so it was Harry who went down into the deep gallery night after night and stood before the shining black heart and learned, by failing and failing again, how to pour his own waking will into a 1,000-year-old engine of magic without letting it pour him out in return. It was Hermione who kept him from being poured out. She held the loom, the memory, and the law, and she sat beside him on the cold gallery floor every one of those nights with her hand braided into his, the silver thread of her will anchoring the black thread of his. And when the core atrum's hunger reached up through Harry to drink him dry, as it did the first night badly, so that he came back to himself gray-faced and shaking with Hermione gripping both his shoulders and saying his name like a spell. It was the bond that pulled him back from the edge of the seat that was too heavy for one. The proud Blacks had crowned their sons alone, and their sons had been hollowed out by the house one at a time across 1,000 years, and Harry understood, kneeling in the dark with Hermione's will holding his upright, exactly what the family had forgotten and exactly why it had fallen. It was never meant for one, he said the third night, when the wards finally caught and roared up bright and whole through every floor of the house at once, the alarms ringing, the defenses snapping taut, the house going from a guttering corpse to a fortress between one breath and the next. That's what the heart meant, the seat. It was always too heavy for one, and they kept putting one person on it anyway, alone, and it ate them, and they called the eating nobility. He looked at her in the new bright light of the wakened wards. We're the first ones in 1,000 years to do it the way it was supposed to be done. Then let's not muck it up, said Hermione, who was exhausted and filthy and luminous, and got to her feet and pulled him up after her, because there was a great deal left on the list. The bond did not feel the way Hermione had braced for it to feel. She had expected in the part of her that still feared the magic had decided her without her leave, that it would be a leash, a thing in her head that was not hers, a second will pressing on her own. It was nothing like that. It was quieter and far stranger. It was the sense always now of a low warm weight somewhere off to the left of her own thoughts, the way you know without looking that someone you trust is sitting in the room, and when she reached for it on the fourth night, alone in the tapestry room with the ledgers, frightened of the writ and tired past sense, she felt Harry feel her reach 2 floors below in the deep gallery, and felt his attention turned toward her like a face turning toward a sound. He came up the stairs without being asked. That was the thing about the bond she would never quite get used to and never quite want to be without. It did not put words in her, it put no commands, no thoughts that were not her own. It only meant that when she was at the end of herself, she was not any longer at the end of herself alone. You don't have to do all of it tonight, Harry said from the doorway, and sat down across the ledgers from her, and did not try to take the work away, because he had learned long ago that taking her work away was not a kindness to Hermione Granger. He just sat where she could see him. Whatever you found in there, it can be true in the morning too. You're allowed to sleep. I keep thinking, Hermione said, and her voice was smaller than she let it be in daylight, that I reasoned my way into this. That I read the books and I understood the bond, and I decided with my eyes open that I wanted it. And I did, I do. But there's a part of me, Harry, a small, mean, frightened part that's been with me since I was 6 and the other children worked out I was different, and that part keeps whispering that I didn't choose it at all. That a dying house wanted a clever girl to hold its books, and it reached out and took one, and the wanting only felt like belonging. She made herself look at him. I mean, it's not that. Tell me I didn't just get chosen by a thing that needed me, the way I've spent my whole life waiting to be chosen by anyone at all. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the ledgers, not for her hand, but he laid his own palm up on the dust between them and left the choosing of it to her, which was the only way to offer Hermione anything. The house didn't braid us together, he said. You told me that yourself. It can't. It only finds what's already there. So whatever's between us, it was there before the house ever woke. It was there in a bathroom with a troll when we were 11. It was there in the dark under the school when you walked into it beside me and didn't run. The house didn't choose you for me, Hermione. It just had better eyes than the rest of the world and saw what was already true. He swallowed. I've been chosen by a house and a blood and a name this autumn, and not one of them means as much to me as the fact that you were there before any of it, when I was nobody, when there was nothing in me to want. You didn't get chosen because you were useful. You got chosen because you were already mine and I was already yours, and the house was just the first thing in 13 years honest enough to say so. Hermione put her hand in his. She let herself have it for one moment, the warm weight off to the left of her thoughts, and the boy across the ledgers in the green light, and the strange impossible fact of being, after all the years of bracing, simply and completely wanted. And then she was Hermione again, and she squeezed his hand once and let it go and pulled the ledger back toward her, because the writ was still in the walls and the hearing was still coming, and she had decided. Allow the world to wait exactly that long for her and not a second more. Right, she said steadier. Then help me read. 4 eyes are faster than 2. And they bent their heads over the books together in the greenlit dark, and the bond hummed low and warm between them, black thread and silver, and held. The restoring of the burned names was Harry's idea, and it was the first thing he did as heir that the screaming portrait could not forgive. He found Walburga's portrait in its place at the head of the stairs, and he did not shout at it, though it shouted at him. Filth and half-blood and traitors get, the whole curdled litany. He simply waited until it ran down, the way he had waited out Aunt Petunia's silences his whole childhood, and then he said very quietly, I'm restoring Andromeda to the tree, and her daughter. Every name your family burned off for loving the wrong person, I'm putting back. The house chose me, the house chose Hermione, the house grew my father's name back over your scorch. So the house has already decided what it thinks of your purity. I'm just doing the paperwork. The portrait's shriek brought dust off the rafters. Harry let it. And then he went up to the tapestry room, where Hermione waited with the loom open in her keeping, and together, the voice and the loom, the heir and the lady, they did the thing no Black had done in 1,000 years of the family's history. They unburned. It was harder than it sounded. The scorch marks were not absences. They were wounds, deliberate violences worked into the living cloth, and restoring a name meant reaching into the tapestry's memory and finding the burned soul and telling the house, in the language of the loom, that this one was not cast out, this one was kin, this one belonged. Hermione named them from the ledgers one by one. Andromeda Black, burned for marrying Ted Tonks. Nymphadora Tonks, never inscribed at all. Marius Black, burned generations back for being a squib, for the unforgivable crime of being born without magic. A dozen others, daughters and sons, struck off across 200 years for the sin of loving outside the cloth, and Harry, holding the voice, told the house to grow them back, and the gold thread crept and nodded in the greenlit dark, and name after name after name came home to the tree. When it was done, the tapestry was fuller than it had been in 2 centuries, and it was the first time in the history of the House of Black that the tree had grown in the direction of mercy. Towders purr, Hermione said softly, reading the old motto stitched in faded gold across the top of the tree, always pure. She looked at it for a long moment, at the cruelty a family had made of 3 words, and then she looked at the unburned names crowding back onto the branches, the half-bloods and the muggle lovers and the squib, all of them home. We should change it, can we? Harry said. Change the motto of a 1,000-year-old house. The house chose us. The house grew the names back. I think, said Hermione slowly, the house has been waiting 1,000 years for someone to change it. She reached up, lady of the house, keeper of the loom, and laid her hand against the faded gold letters, and she did not strike them out, because that would have been a burning, and they were done with burning. She let them stand. And beneath them, in fresh thread at her word and Harry's will, the house stitched a second line so that the old motto and the new hung together on the tree for anyone to read. Towders pur, Towders fidel, always pure, always faithful. The pride of the old house, and beneath it, at last, the thing the old house had never once understood, that the only purity worth a nut was the purity of the people who stayed. The green fire flared the length of the room, bright and clean, as though the house itself had let out a breath it had been holding for 1,000 years. Nymphadora Tonks arrived 2 days later, fell over the troll's leg umbrella stand in the hall, swore with tremendous fluency, and changed Harry's entire idea of what a member of his family could be. Watch her, she said, picking herself up, her hair cycling through 3 colors of embarrassment in the space of a sentence. Sorry, I trip over everything. Mum says I tripped over my own name at birth, which, fair, given what she called me, don't, by the way, don't ever, it's Tonks, just Tonks, you're the cousin then. She looked Harry up and down with frank curiosity, and her eyes, which were, at that moment, a cheerful violet, went briefly soft. Blimey, you really do have his eyes. Mum showed me pictures of Sirius from before. You've got the black bones and the Potter mess on top. It's a good face, don't let it go to your head. She stuck out a hand, Auror, Junior Auror, very junior, which is going to be useful to you, cousin, because it turns out the Department of Magical Law Enforcement has a great deal of paper on a great many things, and I have just been restored to a family tree I never knew I was burned off of, and I find I'm feeling extremely loyal." She was warmth where the house had only ever known cold, and she was the first thing in a fortnight that made Harry laugh without grief underneath it, and she was, beneath the tripping and the cheerful violet hair, an aura with access to the ministry's records and a freshly minted hatred of the people who had carved her mother out of existence. Hermione took one look at her and began making a second list. They ate together the first real meal the house had seen in 12 years, on the night the wards were whole and the names were home, and it was the thing Harry would hold up against the dark for a long time afterward, the way he had once held up the moment in the shrieking shack. Creature cooked it, no one ordered him to. He had been thawing for weeks in the slow, grudging way of a thing 200 years frozen, and on the night the tapestry grew its mercy he had crept into the kitchen and begun, muttering, to cook, and what he produced was extraordinary. Course after course of food the house had not smelled since before its fall, the cooking of an elf who had once fed lords and had spent 12 years feeding only his own grief. Andromeda came, and Tonks and Sirius sat at the head of his own table in his own house as a man, gaunt and grinning, with his son on one side and his son's bonded lady on the other, and the cousin he'd thought lost across from him. And for the length of one meal there was no hearing, no petition, no knife in the walls, only a family, an impossible patchwork family of the burned and the hunted and the thrown away. Eating together in a house that had spent 1,000 years being a fortress against exactly this. "To the House of Black," Sirius said, raising a glass of something Creature had found in a cellar that predated the family's fall. His ruined voice had gone rough, not the one I ran away from, the one these two built out of its bones in 6 weeks, with better taste and worse manners, and not a drop of Tauger's purr in the lot of us. He looked down the table at all of them, and his gray eyes were wet, and he did not care. "I spent 13 years thinking my family was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Turns out I just hadn't met the right blacks yet." He lifted the glass higher. "Tauger's fidel, always faithful, to the ones who stay." "To the ones who stay," they said, all of them, even Creature, who said it last and quietest from the doorway, with his huge bloodshot eyes shining in the green light, an old Creature who had been told for 200 years that faith meant cruelty, learning at the very end that it had always meant this. The wealth woke with the wards, and it was Hermione, holding the loom, who first understood how much of it there was. She had read the ledgers, she had thought she knew. She did not know. The numbers in the oldest books were one thing. A column of galleons is only ever a column of galleons. But when the house came fully awake, it opened its treasuries to its heir the way it had opened the blood road, and what lay behind the doors that answered to Harry's blood was not a vault in the sense Gringotts meant the word. It was deeper than that, older, folded into the buried galleries, the way everything in the deep house was folded. Halls of it, gold and goblin silver, and older coin than either. And beyond the gold, the things the gold was only the least of libraries the ministry would have burned and the unspeakables would have killed for, artifacts of 1,000 years of the most acquisitive family in Britain, a material foundation so vast that Hermione stood in the first of the treasure halls with a lit wand and was, for once in her life, entirely without words. "They were never poor, the Blacks," she said at last, "but I didn't, Harry. This isn't a fortune. A fortune is a number. This is power. This is the kind of wealth that doesn't sit in a vault. It moves things, it owns favors. It's why nobody dared touch the estate for 12 years even when everyone thought the line was dead. Malfoy's been circling this the way a man circles a thing he wants so badly he can taste it." She turned slowly, the wand light sliding over the heaped gold. "And it's yours. It answered your blood, the doors opened for you, which means it's ours to use, and we are going to need to use it, because you cannot fight the kind of war Malfoy's bringing on courage and cleverness alone. You fight it on courage and cleverness and the deepest vault in Britain." The goblins came to them in the end, rather than the other way around, because Harry could not safely walk into Gringotts as the unrevealed heir, and the goblins, who held the truth of his blood and did not forget it, sent one of their own down a path of the blood road that goblin magic and black magic had agreed, in some treaty older than either of them cared to discuss, to keep open. Griffook came into the deep gallery with the wary contempt all goblins kept for wizards and a flicker of something else underneath it, something almost like respect, because the boy standing before the awakened heart was the first holder of the senior blood to treat with the goblin nation in 12 years, and he did it, the goblin noted, without once mentioning the gold first. "The nation knows what you are," Griffook said. "It has known since the summer. It does not sell what it knows, and it does not forget it, and it has been waiting, in the patient way of the nation, to see whether the heir of black would prove worth the knowing." His black eyes moved to Hermione, to the loom he could feel her holding, and something shifted in his ancient face, and whether the lady would. A house that crowns its law to one who reads the old contracts and respects them is a house the nation can do business with. The last several lords of black were not such houses. A thin goblin smile. "We will hold your vaults against the ministry, heir of black, and we will honor your blood over any writ of escheat any wizard cares to file, because the writ is wizard law and the vault is goblin keeping, and the two have never been the same thing. Whatever the Wisengamot decides about your seat, the gold answers to your blood, and the blood is on our record, and our record does not bend to vote. It was, Hermione would say afterward, the single most useful sentence anyone said to them in the whole long autumn, because it meant that whatever happened on the floor of the Wisengamot, the material foundation of the House of Black could not be voted away, and a house whose wealth cannot be touched is a house that can lose a hearing and still not be destroyed. She made Harry thank Griffook properly in the old form, and she made the thanks generous, and the goblin went away marginally less contemptuous of wizard kind than he had come, which was, by goblin standards, a triumph on the order of a treaty. "That's the floor under us," Hermione said when he had gone. "Whatever Malfoy does in the open, whatever the writ does in the dark, we don't lose the gold, and we don't lose the house's deep strength, because the goblins hold one and the blood holds the other, and neither answers to the Wisengamot. He can take the seat from us if he's clever enough. He can't take the foundation." She looked at the heaped halls of 1,000 years, and her jaw set. "So let's make sure that when he comes, he finds a house that's already standing on rock." Tonks brought the ministry's paper to the table the next night, and it changed the war. She spread it out across the scrubbed wood, copies and copies of copies, and a few things she was very clearly not supposed to have at all, and tapped a thin folder with one chewed fingernail. Her hair gone the flat businesslike brown it went when she had stopped being charming and started being an Auror. "Right. 2 things, and they're both about how you clear him, because everything else falls apart if you can't, and I've spent a week in the records learning exactly how badly they buried it." She slid the folder toward Hermione. "Thing 1, Sirius Black never had a trial." The table went still. "Never," Tonks said. "Not a hearing, not an arraignment, not a single minute in front of the Wisengamot. Crouch was head of magical law enforcement, the war was at its worst, and he sent your father to Azkaban on the strength of a blown-up street and a reputation, by emergency order, with no trial at all. It's right there in the file, or it's right there in the gap in the file, which is louder. And here's the part that matters, cousin. A sentence imposed without trial can be vacated. It's not an appeal, you can't appeal a verdict that was never reached. It's a procedural void. Any properly seated voice of an ancient and noble house can stand on the floor of the Wisengamot and demand that a member of a great family be tried before he's punished. And the demand has to be heard, because it's the oldest right the old houses kept for themselves, and they will not vote to give it away, not even to spite a half-blood. Because the day they let the ministry imprison one of theirs without trial is the day it can be done to any of them." Hermione had gone very still over the folder, and Harry watched the cold, bright machinery of her start to turn. "So we don't ask them to believe he's innocent," she said slowly. "We ask them to give him the trial they never gave him, which they have to grant because their own privilege depends on it. And once he's actually on trial, said Andromeda quietly from across the table, "the rules change entirely. A trial admits evidence a petition never would. A trial can compel testimony. A trial can demand the use of veritaserum and a memory in a pensive and the record of a goblin's basin laid before the court by the accused's own house, none of which Lucius can keep out, because the moment it's a trial and not a petition, it isn't his proceeding anymore. It's the law's." Her heavy-lidded eyes glinted. "Lucius built a petition because a petition is a thing he controls. The single most dangerous thing we can do to him is turn it into a trial, which is a thing nobody controls." "Then that's the move," Harry said, and felt the whole shape of it lock into place, the way a ward locked when the wolf found its anchor. "We don't go to the hearing to fight the petition on Malfoy's terms. We go to demand a trial on ours." Hermione stands as the voice of the house and invokes the oldest right the old families have, and forces them to give my father the day in court they stole from him 13 years ago. He looked round the table at the impossible patchwork of them. "And in that court we put everything on the table at once. The basin, the right, the paternity, Pettigrew if we can get him, and a confessed traitor alive is worth more than any argument. We stop defending and we start prosecuting." His jaw set. "Make the trial that clears my father the same trial that proves I'm his son. One proceeding, both truths, no way for them to grant one without granting the other." "It's elegant," said Hermione with the particular hush she reserved for a thing that was both beautiful and likely to get them all killed. "It's genuinely elegant, and it has exactly one flaw, which is that the cleverer it is, the more certain it makes the other thing." She looked up, and the brightness in her face had a shadow under it now. "If we force a trial and win it, if we clear Sirius and prove Harry's blood in open court, then Lucius's petition is dead, publicly, humiliatingly, in front of the whole Wisengamot. And that is the precise moment, the only moment that Narcissa wakes the writ, because the cleaner our victory in the light, the more they need the knife in the dark." She closed the folder gently. "So the plan is right, Harry. It's exactly right. We just have to remember that doing it right is what springs the trap." The cold came south while they were learning to be a family, and it came wearing the face of the only person alive whose blood could wake the knife. Narcissa Malfoy went to Azkaban on a gray morning under a writ of supervised audience, the privilege of a sane and free daughter of an ancient and noble house, and she was rowed across the black water to the fortress on its black rock, and she sat in a warded visiting cell across an iron table from the thing her sister had become. Bellatrix Lestrange had been beautiful once, the way Walburga had been beautiful, and Azkaban had done to her what cruelty had done to her great-aunt, only faster and from the inside. She was all bone and matted hair and burning hooded eyes, and when she saw her sister she smiled, and the smile was the worst thing in the cell. "Sissy," she breathed, "little Sissy, come all this way. Has it happened then? Has the house fallen to filth at last? I can feel it, even here, even in the dark, I can feel the writ stirring. I wrote it so well. I wrote it for this exact day, the day the line failed into mongrel hands, and I knew even then that it would be you who came to wake it, because you're the only one of us left both pure and free." She leaned across the iron table, and her chains rang. Tell me what crawled onto our seat." "A boy," Narcissa said with the cold precision that was her whole defense against being her sister. "Sirius's son, concealed 13 years under a rite, a half-blood," a pause, "and a mudblood girl crowned beside him as lady, bonded heir, the conjunction of the quick." Bellatrix Lestrange laughed, and the sound of it brought the Dementors drifting close outside the warded door, drawn to the only joy left in that place, which was the joy of a madwoman contemplating ruin. "A mudblood," she said when she could speak, "a mudblood lady of the House of Black. Oh, Sissy, that is better than I ever dreamed. The house has shamed itself so completely that there's no mercy left to be wasted on it." She pressed her gaunt face close to her sister's, and her burning eyes went flat and serious and utterly sane, which was the most frightening thing she had done. "Listen to me. The writ I left is not a curse. A curse they could break. That clever little mudblood would unpick a curse in a week, I've no doubt. The writ is a claim, and a claim cannot be broken, it can only be answered, and the only answer to a claim of pure blood is purer blood. You wake it, Sissy. You, the purest living daughter of the senior line, free and sane and untainted. You reach into the deep law of the house, and you speak my words, and the house will have no choice. Its own 1,000-year law will rise up and strip the seat from the filth and lay it in your hand, and there will be nothing the boy can do, nothing the mudblood can do, nothing that dying heart can do, because the law is the law, and they will be standing inside it when it turns on them." Her chains rang again as she sat back, satisfied. "Do it at the hearing. Let Lucius lose in the open first. Let them taste winning. And then wake my knife and take it all back in their own home, by our own blood, in the moment they think they've won." The smile returned. "I do so want them to think they've won first." Narcissa Malfoy sat very still across the iron table and looked at the ruin of her sister, and felt the thing she always felt in Bellatrix's presence. Not love exactly, and not fear, but the cold pull of the family they had both been forged in, the certainty that had been bred into them with their mother's milk that blood was everything and that everything was owed to blood. "There may be a difficulty," she said. "Andromeda has surfaced. She's with them, restored to the tree, I'm told. A daughter of the senior line, as pure-born as you or I." For the first time, the smile left Bellatrix's face. "Andromeda is burned off," she hissed. "She's nothing. She chose her mudblood and her mongrel daughter, and she's nothing. She's less than the filth on the seat. She was burned off by the family," Narcissa said quietly, "but the house has grown her back. And if the only answer to a claim of pure blood is purer blood, sister, then I am not the only pure daughter of the senior line who can speak on the floor of that house any more, and the other one is standing with them." The cell went very quiet. Outside the warded door the Dementors drifted, and the black water lapped the black rock, and Bellatrix Lestrange stared at her sister with her burning hooded eyes, and something moved behind them that was, for the first time, not certain. "Then," she said at last, very softly, "we will have to make quite sure, Sissy, that dear Andromeda is in no condition to speak at all." They felt the first probe against the wards on the 40th night, and it was Tonks of all of them who understood what it meant. It was not an attack. It was a touch, something testing the wards Harry had relit, brushing along them in the dark, the way a thief tries the windows of a house before he comes back with the crowbar, looking for the give. The wards held, the alarms murmured, and by the time Harry was down in the deep gallery with the voice in his throat, the touch was gone, leaving nothing but a cold residue along the threshold that Tonks crouched to examine with her wand and her auror's eye. "That's not ministry," she said. Her hair had gone a flat, serious brown, all the cheer drained out of it. "Ministry surveillance is clumsy and it's legal, and it doesn't care if you notice. This was careful. This was someone good, testing your defenses and meaning you not to know they'd done it, and the only reason we caught it is that you've got the wards up brighter than this house has had them in 20 years. She straightened and looked at the three of them, at Harry and Hermione and the great black dog that was Sirius. "Someone's casing the house, properly. The kind of casing you do before you send someone in." Her jaw set. "The hearing's in 11 days, and someone has decided they're not going to wait for it." Hermione had gone very still, and Harry watched the cold, steady work of her mind, the fear pressed flat beneath it. It fits, she said. It fits the whole shape of it. The petition in the open, the writ in the dark, and now a third thing, a hand reaching for the house itself because they've understood what we understood, that a living house can't be escheated, and the most certain way to make a house escheatable is to make it dead. She looked up. They're going to try to break in, Harry. Before the hearing or during it, while the world's looking at the Wisengamot, and I don't think they're coming to steal. Bellatrix's writ needs the purest living black to wake it, and Andromeda's restoration just made that harder for them. There are 2 pure daughters of the senior line now, and only one of them is on their side. Her voice dropped. Tonks, when you said they'd make sure Andromeda was in no condition to speak. I didn't say that, said Tonks. Who said that? No one said it here, Hermione said slowly, and the cold in her own voice now matched the cold along the threshold. I just heard it all at once, the whole logic of it. They can't wake the writ cleanly while Andromeda's standing as living proof that pure blood can choose love and survive. So before they wake it, before the hearing, while everyone's distracted, they're going to come for her. She turned to the dog, to Sirius. They're going to come for your cousin, the one we just brought home. And they're going to do it in the next 11 days. The dog became a man, gaunt and gray in the green light, and Sirius Black's face had gone hard in a way Harry had not seen on it, not the wildness of the papers and not the grief of the cell, but something colder and older, the face of a Black who had finally remembered that he was, whatever else, a Black, and that the house had teeth. Then they've made a mistake, said Sirius. They think they're hunting a hunted man, a half-blood boy, and a mudblood girl. They've forgotten the rest of it. He looked at the green fire climbing the brackets, at the wakened wards, at the full tree on the wall with all its unburned names, at the impossible patchwork family that had built a fortress out of the bones of the worst house in Britain. They've forgotten that the House of Black is awake again, and that an awake House of Black has never, in 1,000 years, been a safe thing to move against. His gray eyes came up, and the old marauder cunning was in them, sharpened now to something with an edge. They want to come into our house in the dark. Fine, let them come, but it's not their house anymore, children, it's ours, and we're going to be ready. Far to the south, in a cold green drawing room, Lucius Malfoy folded a letter from his wife and held it for a moment in the green lamplight, reading the single line that mattered: it is arranged. The difficulty will be removed before the hearing, and then he laid it in the fire and watched it burn, and turned back to the writ of petition that would, in 11 days, be read aloud on the floor of the Wisengamot, and made in his small, precise hand one final amendment to the wording, because Lucius Malfoy left nothing ever to chance. The clocks Hermione had counted in an attic in the summer were all of them now, running down toward the same hour, and the hour was 11 days away. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Enemies of blood. They came for Andromeda on the 9th night before the hearing, and they came clever, and they very nearly came clever enough. Hermione had spent the 8 days since the probe building the defense the way she built everything, from the foundations up, and the foundation was this: the attackers did not know the house was awake. They had cased a guttering ruin and a hunted man. They did not know that the wards now answered to a living voice, that the loom held every threshold, that the seat was full. So Hermione did not strengthen the obvious defenses. She left the front door looking exactly as weak as it had looked when they cased it. She made the house lie. Let them think it's still a corpse, she said, standing in the deep gallery with the ledgers of the house's old defenses open in the loom in her mind. Every ward they touched I'm leaving exactly as they found it, thin, slow, ready to give. And behind it, where they can't feel it, we build the real thing. They'll come through a door they think is rotten and find themselves inside a fortress that's been waiting for them. The whole advantage of an awake house, Harry, is that nobody outside knows it's awake. We don't waste that by frightening them off. We spend it by letting them in. They let them in on the 9th night. There were 5 of them, and they were not children, and they were not amateurs. Tonks, crouched at Harry's side in the dark of the upper landing, named 2 of them under her breath from the Aura records, hard men with hard histories, the kind of help that cost real gold and asked no questions. They came over the back wall and through the scullery door that Hermione had left looking like the weakest point in the house, moving in the trained silence of men who had done this before, fanning out toward the stairs, toward the bedrooms, toward the room where they believed a tired, middle-aged woman lay sleeping and undefended. Andromeda was not in that room. Andromeda was on the gallery stair with her wand drawn and her heavy-lidded eyes cold, because Andromeda Tonks had been raised in this family and had no intention whatsoever of being the helpless quarry in someone else's hunt. The house took them on the stairs. It was not, Harry thought afterward, anything like a duel. A duel was 2 people. This was a house. The instant the lead man set his boot on the 2nd step, the step was not there, the loom unmade it, Hermione's while pulling the stair apart beneath him, and he dropped through into a well of dark that had not existed a second before and would not exist a second after, and his shout cut off as the floor sealed over him like water. The green fire in the brackets, which had burned low and dying for the men casing the house from outside, roared up all at once into a blinding wall, and the second man fired a curse into it, and the curse came back at him doubled, because Harry held the voice and the wards answered him, and an awake house of black did not absorb a curse thrown in its own halls, it returned it with interest. "Now," Hermione said, and Harry brought the voice down. He had been learning these 8 days what it meant to be the hand on the wards of a living house, and he brought the whole of it down on the 3 men still standing in the hall, not a spell, not a jet of light, but the house itself. The cold and the dark and the green fire and the 200 years of accumulated malice the blacks had built into every stone, all of it turning on the intruders at once like a hound that has finally been let off the chain. They went down. It went down hard, and they did not get up, and it was over in less time than it takes to tell. And Harry stood at the head of the stairs breathing hard with the voice ringing in his throat and understood, with a clarity that frightened him a little, exactly how much power he had been handed and exactly how careful he was going to have to be with it for the rest of his life. "That's the difference," said Sirius softly beside him, a man, not a dog, because the deep house was his and no surveillance reached it. "Between us and them, they sent men into a house. We are the house." He looked down at the fallen attackers with no pity and no triumph, only the cold assessment of a black. "Tonks, bind them, properly, because one of these is going to tell us who paid him, and then we are going to have, for the first time, something better than a basin's word and a child's claim. We're going to have a confession." But Hermione had gone very still at the foot of the stairs, and when she spoke her voice had the flat, cold note that meant she had seen one move too far ahead and not liked the look of it. "It's a feint," she said. "What? 5 hired men over the wall, through the weakest door, straight for the room they thought Andromeda was sleeping in. It's too clean, Harry. It's exactly what we'd expect, which is exactly why it's wrong. Narcissa Black does not send 5 men to murder a witch in her bed and call it a plan. She knows we're not fools. She's a Black. She assumes everyone is as clever and as ruthless as she is. So this," she gestured at the bound men, at the trap that had worked so beautifully, "this is the thing we were supposed to catch. This is the move that makes us feel safe, that uses up our attention, that makes us think the attack has come and been beaten. The real one is somewhere else, right now, while we're standing here congratulating ourselves." Her eyes flew wide. "Where's Andromeda?" Andromeda Tonks was no longer on the gallery stair. They found her in the entrance hall, and they found her alive, and they found her standing over the body of the 6th attacker, the real one, the good one, the one who had come not over the back wall with the loud 5 but in through the front door in the confusion, alone, silent, a professional sent to do the one job that mattered while the others drew the eye. And Andromeda's wand was steady and her face was gray, and there was a long shallow cut across her forearm where a blade meant for her throat had instead found only her arm, because a daughter of the House of Black raised to expect betrayal does not, it transpires, ever fully turn her back on a door. "He came in behind the loud ones," Andromeda said. Her voice was steady and her hands were not. "Through the front while you had the stairs. Good, very good. I only caught him because I have spent 50 years assuming that the obvious danger is the one I'm meant to look at." She looked down at the man she had stunned and bound, at the blade still in his slack hand. "He wasn't here to kill me cleanly, Harry. Look at the blade. That's not a killing edge, that's a maiming one. They didn't want me dead. A dead daughter of the senior line is a martyr. The house grows her back on the tree and her testimony stands by proxy. They wanted me ruined, cut, cursed. Alive but unable to stand on the floor of the Wisengamot in 9 days and say, with my own pure-born mouth, that the writ is wrong." Her gray eyes came up and there was iron in them. "They understand the writ exactly as we do. The only answer to a claim of pure blood is purer blood or equal blood that chooses differently. And I am the equal blood that chose differently, so they came to make sure I could never say so." The hall was very quiet. The green fire burned steady in the brackets. And Harry, looking at his cousin standing gray and bleeding and unbroken over the man who had been sent to unmake her, felt the whole shape of the next 9 days settle on him like the crown had settled in the gallery, heavy and cold and exactly right. "They failed," he said. "They failed tonight," said Hermione, who was already kneeling by the bound professional, already going through his pockets with quick, clever hands, already building the case. "Which means they'll have a second plan, because people like Narcissa Malfoy always have a second plan, and the second plan is the one that wins on the floor itself, in front of the whole Wisengamot, where we can't drop anyone through a staircase." She held up what she had found in the man's coat, not a name, never a name, but a folded square of parchment bearing a single pressed seal, a coiled serpent and a wand, the mark of a hired house that asked no questions. "But we've got this. And we've got 6 bound men in our cellar, and we've got 9 days. The professional did not break under fear, because professionals did not, and Hermione had not expected him to. He broke under arithmetic. They did not use the cruel old methods the house knew, and offered up to Harry like a dog laying a dead bird at its master's feet. Harry had felt the house suggest them, in the voice, the cold catalogue of things the Blacks had done to men in this very cellar, and had told it, quietly and firmly, no. They used Veritaserum, 3 drops, brewed by Hermione to a standard that would have earned full marks from a potions master who loathed her, and they used Tonks, who sat across from the bound man with her Auror's badge on the table between them, and laid out, in a flat bored voice, the precise number of years in Azkaban that attached to armed entry of an ancient and noble house with intent to maim a member of the senior line. "You can't put a price on it that's worth that," she said. "Nobody can. So here's the arithmetic, friend. You came in under a contract with a hired house, the Serpentine Wand. We've got the seal. Hired houses don't know their clients. That's what you sell, deniability, and it's why you'll never be able to give us the Malfoys with your own mouth even under the serum, because you genuinely don't know it was them." She leaned in. "But you know the broker. You know the vault the gold came out of. You know the date and the room where the contract was struck. And the serum's going to give us all three whether you fancy it or not. So the only choice you've actually got left is whether you give it to us looking cooperative, which I'll note in the record, or looking sullen, which I won't." He gave them the broker, and the vault, and the date. And the date was the morning after Narcissa Malfoy's supervised audience at Azkaban, and the vault, when Tonks ran it through the Gringotts register Hermione had charmed a copy of, was a numbered cutout 3 transfers removed from the Malfoy accounts. 3 transfers, Hermione observed, being precisely the number a careful man uses when 2 would be careless and 4 would be paranoid. "It won't convict them," Hermione said afterward in the tapestry room, laying the threads of it out for Sirius and Andromeda. 3 transfers in a hired house and a broker who'll vanish before any summons reaches him. Lucius built it to survive exactly this. We can't stand up in front of the Wisengamot and say Lucius Malfoy sent men to maim your cousin, because we can't prove the last inch of it, and the last inch is the only inch that matters in a court. She set down the parchment. "But that was never what it was for. It's not for the court, it's for us. Because now we know, beyond doubt, 3 things we only guessed before. We know Narcissa is the hand behind the blade. We know the audience at Azkaban was where she got her orders, which means Bellatrix's writ is real and they mean to wake it. And we know they're not waiting for the law, they'll break it the instant the law looks the wrong way." She looked up and her eyes were hard. "Which means the hearing isn't going to be a hearing. It's going to be an ambush wearing a hearing's robes, and the only way to survive an ambush you can see coming is to walk into it having already planned for the moment it springs." Sirius looked at the girl his son's blood had braided itself to, 14 years old, mapping a trap 9 days out as calmly as another child might map a chessboard, and something in his ruined face was pride and something else was fear. "And have we," he said, "planned for the moment it springs?" "No," Hermione admitted. "Because I don't yet know what the spring is. I know they'll wake the writ. I don't know how a writ woken on the floor of the Wisengamot actually behaves, because nobody alive has ever seen it done, and the books I'd need are the ones only the Deep House holds." She stood. "So I've got 9 days to learn a thing that's never been written down from a heart that's dying about a knife designed to kill us. Wonderful, let's get started." She pushed her wild hair back and her chin came up, and the fear went under the work the way it always did. "Let's stop defending the house. Let's go and take the floor." She spent 8 of the 9 days underground in the deep gallery, learning a thing that had never been written down. The Coratrum was the only teacher she had, and it was dying, and it did not teach the way books taught. It did not give her the writ's mechanism in any form she could write in a margin. It gave her the writ the way it gave her everything now that she held the loom. As a weight, a shape, a pressure under the breastbone that she had to learn to read the way a blind woman learns a face, by touch, by patience, by the slow accumulation of 1,000 small certainties. She sat at the foot of the shining black seat for hours at a stretch with her hand pressed to the cold stone, reaching into the deep law, feeling along the edges of Bellatrix's sleeping knife, mapping what it would do when it woke. Harry sat with her every hour of it, because the seat was too heavy for one and the law was learned best braided, and because, though neither of them said it, the deep gallery in the small hours was the only place in the world the two of them were ever entirely alone, and there was a comfort in that neither was in a hurry to examine. "I can't break it," she said on the 6th night, and there was no defeat in it, only the flat, clean honesty she brought to a problem once she had reasoned all the way to its floor. "I keep coming at it the way I'd come at a curse, find the binding, unpick the thread, undo the magic. And it's not magic that can be undone, it's law. It's woven into the foundation, and you can't unpick a foundation without bringing the house down on your own head, which is exactly what Bellatrix wanted. She built it so that fighting it destroys you faster than letting it win." She tipped her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. "So I've stopped trying to break it. You can't break a law. You can only change the law it depends on, or be standing in the right place when it springs, holding the right thing so that when it does what it was built to do, what it was built to do is no longer what it thinks." Her eyes opened. "I don't have the second half of that yet. I've got the shape of an answer and a hole where the middle should be, in 4 days. You'll find it," Harry said. "You don't know that. I do, actually." He bumped his shoulder against hers in the greenlit dark. "You found the troll and the stone and the basilisk and the way to make a basin tell the truth and the way to stand on the floor of the Wisengamot at 14. You always find it, usually about 4 minutes before we'd all have died without it, which I admit is hard on my nerves, but you find it." He looked at the heart, turning slow and bright above them. And if you don't, if there's no clever answer, if the writ wakes and there's nothing to be done, then I'm still going to be standing next to you when it does. So you're not finding it alone, and you're not facing it alone if it can't be found. That's the deal. That's been the deal since we were 11. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she found his hand in the dark, palm up, and put hers in it, and they sat at the foot of the dying heart of the most dangerous house in Britain, with the bond humming low and warm between them, black thread and silver, and she let herself, for the length of one held breath, simply not be afraid. The new word, she said suddenly, sitting up, and Harry felt the whole air of her change, felt the click of a mind finding the missing middle. The motto, Taugers Fidel. I changed the foundational law when I stitched it. I changed what the house means by pure, and the writ depends on the foundational law. It has to, it's written into it. Her eyes were blazing now. I've been trying to break the writ, Harry, when the whole time the answer was that I already broke it, 6 weeks ago, the day we unburned the tree. The writ claims for the purist, and I changed what purist means, and the writ doesn't know yet because it's still asleep, but when it wakes, it'll wake into a law that no longer says what Bellatrix thought it said. She was on her feet, pacing fast, the fear gone entirely now into the pure joy of a problem solved. I can't break it, I don't have to. Just have to make sure that when it wakes into my law and not hers, and that there's a claimant standing ready to force the house to choose which purity it means. She stopped. Andromeda, it's Andromeda, pure blood equal to Narcissa who chose love. She's the living proof that forces the contest, and the contest is what lets the new law decide. She turned to Harry, luminous in the green dark. That's the middle, that's the whole middle. I've had it for 6 weeks and didn't know it was an answer. See, Harry said, 4 minutes to spare, practically early. She threw a cushion at him and he caught it, and for a moment in the deep gallery there was something that had no business being there in the bones of the House of Black on the eve of a battle. There was laughter, the ordinary kind, the kind families have, and the cor atrum turned bright above them and seemed, in its ancient patient way, to approve. The Wisengamot met in a chamber beneath the ministry that was built to make a person feel small, and it very nearly worked. It was a deep stone amphitheater, tier on tier of plum-robed witches and wizards rising into shadow, and at its center a single hard chair where the petitioned party was meant to sit and be judged, and the whole architecture of the place said, as clearly as stone can say anything, that the people in the high seats had always been there and always would be, and that whoever sat in the low chair was there on sufferance and would leave when they were told. Harry, who was not permitted to speak and had come only because nothing in the world would have kept him away, sat in the gallery with Tonks on one side and the great black dog that no one knew was Sirius pressed against his leg on the other, and watched Hermione Granger walk out alone onto the floor of the oldest and proudest court in Wizarding Britain, 14 years old, muggle-born, in plain dark robes, to stand for the House of Black. She did not sit in the low chair. That was the first thing, and the whole chamber felt it. She had read the procedure. Andromeda had drilled her in it for 6 weeks, and she knew that the low chair was for the accused, and the House of Black was not accused of anything. The House of Black was an interested party with standing, and an interested party with standing did not sit where it was put. She stood. She stood in the center of the floor with her chin up in the loom of the house at her back, and she waited in a silence that grew for someone to tell her she could not. The chair will be used, said the functionary at the high desk, a soft, heavy man named Yaxley of the Office of Lineage and Estate, whose salary was modest and whose loyalties were not. The chair is for a defendant, Hermione said. Her voice was clear and it carried and it did not shake. I am not a defendant. I am the lady of the most ancient and noble House of Black, appearing by right of the seat to answer a petition against my house. I will stand as the voice of a great house has always stood, or you will explain to this chamber why the House of Black is to be denied a courtesy extended to every other ancient and noble line in 900 years. A murmur ran up the tiers. It was not friendly, exactly, but it was interested, and on the third tier an old witch in plum robes leaned to the wizard beside her and said something behind her hand, and Harry understood, watching, the first move of the game Hermione had explained to him in the den. That the old families hated a muggle-born lady, yes, but they hated the ministry telling a great house what it could and could not do far more, because the day the ministry could do it to Black was the day it could do it to them. Lucius Malfoy rose from the petitioner's bench, pale and smooth and unhurried, and inclined his head to Hermione with a courtesy more insulting than any sneer. Let the child stand by all means, he said, to the chamber, not to her. It costs us nothing, and it is, I confess, a novel spectacle. He let the word child hang in the air. I had not expected the estate to send a voice at all, given its circumstances. I had certainly not expected it to send this one. But I am a generous man, and I have no wish to win on a technicality what I can win on the merits. So let her stand, let her speak, and let this chamber see for itself exactly what the House of Black has been reduced to, that it must send a 14-year-old of unknown parentage to plead for a name 1,000 years old. He turned at last to face her directly, and his pale eyes were perfectly empty. Speak, then, Lady of Black. Tell us why this chamber should not do the merciful and necessary thing and lay a dead house to rest. What followed, Harry would tell his father afterward, was the most frightening hour of his life, and he had stood in front of a basilisk. It was frightening because it was so close. Lucius Malfoy was good, better than good. He was a man who had spent 20 years learning exactly which words moved a room of frightened proud people, and exactly which truths could be made to sound like lies, and he did not argue that Harry did not exist because the Goblin's record made that impossible. He argued the far more dangerous thing. He argued that Harry's existence was an embarrassment the chamber would be relieved to be rid of. A child got upon a mudblood, he said, and the word was a blade, and he used it like one, watching it land on Hermione and finding to his visible interest that it did not make her flinch, by a convicted murderer, concealed for 13 years under a charm of fraudulent paternity, surfacing at the precise moment the Black Fortune wants a claimant. Members of the Wisengamot, I do not say the boy is not of black blood. I say that the blood of black has been in him so debased, so concealed, so tangled in fraud and shame that to seat him would be to make a mockery of every pure line in this room. We are not asked to be cruel, we are asked to be clean. The line failed, let it rest with dignity and pass to the nearest blood that has nothing to hide. He spread his hands. I have a son, he is pure, he is here in the open under his own name, with no charms and no concealments and no convict's shadow. The chamber may seat a half-blood fraud, or it may seat a clean and honest heir. I leave the choice, as I must, to your wisdom. It was very good. Harry could feel it working, could feel the tears leaning toward the clean, easy answer, the one that let them be rid of the embarrassment and keep the fortune among the pure, and beside him the great black dog had gone rigid, a low sound building in its chest that Harry put a hand on to still. And then Hermione began to speak, and Harry watched her take Lucius Malfoy's beautiful clean argument and turn it, syllable by syllable, into a noose. The petitioner asks you to be clean, she said. Let us be clean then, let us be exact. The petitioner's entire case rests on a single word, and the word is failed. The line failed, he says. The line is extinct. Therefore the estate may be escheated and passed to the nearest blood. Everything he has said for the last half hour is decoration on that one load-bearing word. She turned slowly to take in the whole chamber. So let us test it. A line is extinct in law when there is no living issue of the body capable of inheriting. The petitioner concedes he must. The Goblin's basin makes it undeniable that Harry James is the living issue of the body of Sirius Black of the senior line. So the line is not extinct, there is issue. The petitioner does not actually argue that the line has failed. He argues that it has failed to be pure enough for his taste, and that members of the Wisengamot is not a question of law. It is a question of breeding, and the last time I checked the statutes, this chamber sat in judgment of law and left the judgment of breeding to people with nothing better to do. A sound went up the tears that was almost a laugh, and Lucius Malfoy's smooth face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. But I will give the petitioner his real argument, Hermione went on, since he is too careful to say it plainly. His real argument is that Sirius Black is a convicted felon, civilly dead, and that the issue of a civilly dead man cannot inherit. And that argument has exactly one flaw, and it is a flaw so large that I am astonished a wizard of the petitioner's evident cleverness built his whole case on top of it. She let the silence stretch. Sirius Black was never tried. The chamber went very still. 12 years in Azkaban, Hermione said into that stillness, under sentence for the murder of 13 people and the betrayal of the Potters, and not one day, not 1 hour, not 1 minute of trial. No arraignment, no hearing, no verdict of this chamber or any other. It was sent to the worst prison in the world by emergency order in the chaos of the war, by a head of law enforcement who is not here to defend the decision, and the record of it, which I have and which I will lay before you, shows a sentence with no trial beneath it, like a roof with no house. She turned to face the high tears, and her voice rose, clear and certain and merciless. And so I do not stand here today to contest the petitioner's claim that the issue of a civilly dead man cannot. I concede it, I embrace it. I simply observe that Sirius Black is not in law civilly dead, because civil death follows a lawful sentence, and there has been no lawful sentence because there has been no trial. And I invoke, on behalf of the House of Black, the oldest and most jealously guarded right that the ancient and noble families have ever held against the ministry that would govern them, the right that no member of a great house be punished until he has been tried. I demand the trial that this ministry stole from Sirius Black 13 years ago, and I demand that until that trial is held and a verdict reached, this petition, which rests entirely on his civil death, be struck from the floor as premature. The chamber erupted. It erupted because Hermione had done the thing Andromeda had taught her was the only winning move. She had made the proud old families choose between their hatred of a Muggle-born and their terror of a ministry that could imprison their own without trial. And Harry watched, in the roar that followed, the old witch on the 3rd tier rise to her feet, and then a wizard on the 5th, and then a dozen more plum robes standing all up the tiers, because the right to trial was the right that protected every last one of them. And a chamber full of people who had assumed they would vote to be rid of an embarrassment found itself, instead, voting to protect the oldest privilege of its own blood. Lucius Malfoy was on his feet. This is a transparent maneuver. The boy's guilt is not in question. The matter was settled. The matter was never tried, said the old witch on the third tier in a voice like a closing door. And I will not be the witch who sat in this chamber and let it be said that an ancient and noble house could be stripped of its seat on the strength of a sentence no court ever passed. Today it is Black. Tomorrow Lucius, on a clever enough petition, it could be Malfoy. The girl is right. There will be a trial. And the floor turned. Harry felt it turn, felt the whole chamber swing on the hinge Hermione had built for it. And for one bright impossible moment it was theirs, the trial granted, the petition faltering, the truth about to be dragged into the open in a court that would at last have to hear it, and Hermione stood alone in the center of the floor with her chin up and the loom at her back, 14 years old, having beaten the cleverest man in the room at the game he had spent 20 years mastering. And Harry's heart was so full he could not breathe. It was, of course, the precise moment. Narcissa Malfoy rose from the gallery. She had not spoken once. She had sat through the whole hour in plum robes among the watching families, pale and still and unremarked, the sane free daughter of the senior line, and she rose now into the roar of the turning chamber, and she lifted her voice, and her voice was not loud, but it cut through everything, because it spoke in a register older than the Wisengamot, older than the ministry, a register the whole chamber felt in the bones of the building before they understood the words. I claim the seat of Black, said Narcissa Malfoy, by the writ of blood, by the deep law of my own house, against the impure that would usurp it. The chamber did not understand. Harry did. Harry understood the instant she spoke, and so did Hermione. He saw her go white in the center of the floor, saw her hand fly to her own breastbone, because the words Narcissa spoke were not words for the Wisengamot at all. They were words for the house. They were Bellatrix's words, the formula lodged 13 years ago in the deep law of the Cor Atrum, and Narcissa was the purest living daughter of the senior line, sane and free, and she was speaking them with the full intent of her blood on the floor of the seat of magical law, where the law of the house and the law of the realm met and bled into one another. And under London, in the deep gallery, the writ of blood woke. Harry felt it wake through the voice the way you feel a tooth break, a deep wrong crack at the root of everything. 2 floors of the ministry above the chamber and 3 streets and 1,000 years away, the Cor Atrum, the shining black heart that had chosen him, that had named him heir and crowned Hermione lady, lurched in its seat as its own 1,000-year law turned over inside it and rose, helpless, against the very children it had chosen, because the writ was written into the law, and the heart was the law, and a thing cannot refuse itself. Harry felt the crown of soot and starlight on his brow go cold and begin, horribly, to loosen. He felt the black thread of his blood and the silver thread of Hermione's, braided and bound at the bonding, begin to strain as the house's law reached in to pull the seat out from under them and lay it, as Bellatrix had promised, in the hand of the purest blood. Hermione cried out. She was on her knees on the floor of the Wisengamot, both hands pressed to her breastbone, the loom convulsing in her keeping as 1,000 years of names, and law tried to tear themselves out of a muggle-born girl the writ said had no right to hold them. And Harry was up and moving without deciding to, vaulting the gallery rail, the great black dog erupting into a man behind him with a roar that turned every head in the chamber, Sirius Black, the convict, the most wanted man in Britain. Standing up in the gallery of the Wisengamot in front of the entire court, and the chamber dissolved into screaming and drawn wands and oars surging from the doors. Hermione, Harry hit the floor of the court and skidded to his knees beside her, and got his arms around her, and felt through the bond the thing that was happening to her, the law of the house clawing the loom out of her by the roots, and he reached for the voice to fight it and found the voice loosening in his own throat, the crown going cold, the seat sliding away, because the writ was the law and the law was the heart, and the heart could not, would not, save them from itself. Narcissa Malfoy stood in the gallery above the chaos, pale and calm and terrible, the purest living black, and the seat of 1,000-year house slid inch by its own ancient law toward her waiting blood. It chose you, she said down to the 2 children kneeling broken on the floor, and there was no triumph in it, only the cold certainty of the family they had all been forged in. But blood does not choose, little ones, blood is, and in the end the house remembers what it is. The crown of soot and starlight lifted from Harry's brow. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, Black Father and Heirs. The crown lifted from Harry's brow, and in the half-second before it could rise free, Hermione Granger stopped trying to hold on. That was the thing that saved them, and Harry would spend a long time understanding it. The writ was tearing the loom out of her by the roots, and her whole body was bent around the pain of it, and every instinct she had was to grip, to fight the law clawing at her, to hold the names against the force that wanted to rip them away. And instead, on the floor of the Wisengamot, in the worst moment of her life, Hermione did the thing only Hermione would have thought to do. She stopped fighting the law. She remembered that she was the law. It's the wrong word, she gasped. Harry had his arms around her, the voice loosening in his own throat, the seat sliding away beneath them both. He could feel it going, the wards thinning, the heart turning helpless under London, the whole vast architecture of the house tilting toward the gallery where Narcissa Malfoy stood waiting to catch it, and the worst of it was not the loss. The worst of it was the bond. He could feel the black thread of his blood and the silver thread of her stretched taut to the snapping point, and he understood, with a clarity that turned his stomach, that if the writ pulled the seat far enough it would tear the two of them apart to do it. Hermione, whatever you're going to do it now. The writ, listen, the writ claims the seat for the purest blood. Those are its words, by the deep law of my own house. She got one hand flat on the cold stone floor and pushed herself up, white-faced, shaking, her eyes blazing with the particular fire that meant she had found, in the heart of a catastrophe, the single load-bearing flaw. It's invoking the law of the house, Harry, the deep law, the foundational law, and who keeps the foundational law of the House of Black, and Harry understood. You do, he breathed. You hold the loom, you're the keeper of the law. I'm the keeper of the law, Hermione said, and 6 weeks ago I amended it. She turned her face up to the gallery, to Narcissa Malfoy standing pale and certain above the chaos, and her voice, cracked and breathless as it was, rose to fill the whole stone chamber. The writ claims by the deep law of the house, but the deep law of the House of Black is not a thing carved in a tomb. It is a living law kept by the lady of the house, and I am the lady, lawfully crowned, and I changed it. Before any of you knew my name, in a room under London, I unburned every child this family ever cast out for loving wrongly, and I stitched a new word over the old one into the foundational law itself, and the house took it and made it true. She was on her feet now, swaying, holding the bond between her and Harry like a rope over a chasm. Taugers fidel, always faithful. I changed what the word pure means in the law of this house, Narcissa. And your sister's writ is written in that law and bound by that law, and it must mean by purest exactly what the law it lives in means, and the law it lives in no longer means blood, it means faith. The chamber had gone utterly silent, even the oars had stopped, and under London in the deep gallery the core atrum, which had been turning helpless against the children it loved, paused. Harry felt it pause. He felt the law of the house, the writ rising and the heart bound to honor it, stop, suspended at the place where two laws met. The old law that said purest blood, and the new law lawfully made that said purity is faith. He felt the crown hang a hand's breadth above his hair, neither fallen nor restored, and he understood with the part of him that was learning fast to think like Hermione that the heart could not resolve it alone. The writ named a claim by the purest. There were now two questions tangled in that single word, purest by blood and purest by faith, and a thing cannot answer itself when its own law has split in two. It needed a claimant. It needed someone to stand up and contest Narcissa's claim by the same writ and force the house to choose which purity it meant. I claim the seat of Black. The voice came from the gallery, and it was not Harry's, and it was not Hermione's. It was Andromeda Tonks on her feet among the families, her bandaged forearm held against her chest and her heavy-lidded gray eyes blazing, and she spoke Bellatrix's own formula back into the chamber with the full weight of her own pure-born blood. By the writ of blood, Andromeda said, by the deep law of my own house, I claim it, I Andromeda, daughter of Cygnus of the senior line, as pure in blood as my sisters, purer than either by the only measure that was ever worth a nut. She came down the gallery steps, one at a time, into the silence. Narcissa claims the seat is owed to the purest blood. Very well, I am her equal in blood, sister to sister, daughter to daughter of the same line, so by her own writ the seat cannot simply fall to her, because there is another claim of equal purity on the floor, and where two equal claims of blood contend, the house must judge between them, and the house judges by its law. And its law, she turned to face her sister, and 30 years of being the burned-off one were in her voice, and none of the bitterness was, its law now says Taugers fidel. So judge us, Narcissa, judge us by faith, as the law of our house now demands. You hired men to maim me in my bed so that I could not stand on this floor. I came back to a family that threw me away because 2 children asked me to help them save it. Tell this chamber which of us is the more faithful daughter of the House of Black, and then tell it, if you dare, that the seat is yours. Narcissa Malfoy stood very still in the center of the chamber, the seat of a 1,000-year house hanging suspended between her blood and her sister's, and Harry watched the cold certainty in her face meet. For the first time, a thing it could not simply override, because Andromeda was right and Narcissa was a Black, and a Black does not lie to herself about who has won an argument even when the argument is being lost. And the core atrum, given its claimant, given the contest, given at last the right to choose by the law its own lady had remade, chose. It chose the way it had chosen in the summer, the way it had chosen Harry's blood across half of England, except that now the whole hidden architecture of it was visible, because it was happening on the floor of the Wisengamot in front of the oldest court in Britain, and there was no hiding it any longer. The cold poured up through the stone floor of the chamber. The plum-robed witches and wizards in the high tiers cried out and clutched their seats as the temperature dropped, and the torches guttered to a deep green, and the bones of the ministry itself seemed to ring like a struck bell, because the House of Black had reached up out of the dark under London and into the seat of magical law to render judgment, and 1,000-year-old house rendering judgment is not a quiet thing. The black thread of Harry's blood and the silver thread of Hermione's, which had been straining to the point of breaking, blazed up between them instead, not torn apart by the writ but braided tighter, because the law the writ served had changed and the writ now served faith, and there was nothing in that chamber more faithful than the two of them, who had walked every dark beside each other since they were 11 years old. The crown of soot and starlight, which had hung a hand's breadth above Harry's hair, came back down. It came down harder than before, settled deeper, fit better, because this time it was not given by blood alone but confirmed by judgment, weighed in open court against the purest blood in Britain and found worthier, and Harry felt the voice come roaring back into his throat, fuller than it had ever been, the wards of the deep house snapping taut, the heart blazing bright and whole and no longer dying. Hermione's crown reformed beside his, the looms settling back into her keeping with 1,000 years of names and law that no longer fought her, because she was no longer holding them against the house. She was holding them with it, the keeper of a law the house had remade in its own image at last, and the writ of blood broke. It did not break with violence. It broke the way a lie breaks when the truth is finally said in front of enough witnesses, quietly, completely, and all at once. Bellatrix Lestrange had written a knife to kill any heir who was not pure, and the knife had done exactly what it was made to do. It had found the purest and laid the seat in the purest hands. It had simply turned out in the end that the house no longer measured purity the way the madwoman who forged it did. The writ had served its own logic perfectly and arrived perfectly at the people it was built to destroy, because they were, by the house's own remade law, the purest of all. Far to the north, on a cold black rock in a cold black sea, Bellatrix Lestrange came awake in her cell with a scream that brought the Dementors in a rush, because she had felt her great work wake and turn and break, felt the knife she had honed for 13 years close at last on her own throat, and she understood in the howling dark that she had been undone not by a more powerful blood, but by a muggle-born girl who had simply changed the meaning of the word. And there was no cell deep enough to hold the fury of it. In the chamber beneath the ministry the green cold drew back, the torches steadied, and the House of Black stood seated and whole and chosen in front of the entire Wisengamot, in a boy of 13 and a girl of 14 and a burned-off cousin and a hunted lord, and there was not one thing in all the law of wizarding Britain that anyone could do about it. Narcissa Malfoy looked at her sister Andromeda for a long moment across the silent floor. Then she inclined her head a fraction of an inch, the bow of a black who has lost cleanly and will not demean herself by pretending otherwise, and she turned, and she walked out of the chamber, and she did not look at her husband as she passed him, which Harry would later learn was the cruelest thing she did to anyone that day. The chamber emptied slowly, the way a chamber does when the thing that happened in it was too large for anyone to be quite sure it was over, and Harry came down from the gallery onto the floor where his father stood, not a dog, not a fugitive, not a name in the papers, but a man, standing in the middle of the oldest court in Britain in the ordinary daylight that fell through the high enchanted windows. They had never, Harry realized, stood together in the light. Every moment they had shared had been stolen and underground, a haunted house in the dark, a den beneath a willow, a buried gallery lit by green fire. He had never simply looked at his father in a well-lit room, the way an ordinary boy looks at an ordinary father, with nothing hunting either of them. "It's strange," Sirius said. His ruined voice had not changed, and his face was still all bone and shadow, 12 years of Azkaban that no acquittal could undo in an afternoon, but his gray eyes in the daylight were clear all the way down. "I planned for the swimming, for the breaking out and the coming south and finding you and the dying if it came to that. I never once planned for after. I didn't think there'd be an after." He looked around the emptying chamber at the place that had stolen 13 years of his life and had just grudgingly begun to give them back. "I don't know how to do after, Harry. I've been a prisoner or a fugitive so long I've forgot how to be a man in a room with nothing chasing him." "Neither do I," Harry said. "I've never had an after either. There was always the next thing, the next year, the next dark, the next room nobody wanted me in." He swallowed. "I think we just learn it. Together, badly probably, out of practice, both of us." Sirius laughed, and it was wet, and it cracked in the middle, and it was the most alive sound Harry had ever heard him make. "Out of practice," he agreed. "James would have laughed himself sick at the pair of us, two blacks who don't know how to be happy, blinking at the daylight like a couple of owls." The name still cost him. Harry was learning that it always would, that grief was not a thing you finished, but a thing you carried. "It's good at the ordinary part, the part where you just live, better than me, better than any of us." His hand came up and rested on Harry's shoulder, and the grip of it was no longer iron, no longer the desperate clutch of a drowning man. It was only a father's hand, careful, learning the weight. "I'm going to be bad at this for a while, the father thing, the daylight thing. I spent 13 years where there was nothing soft, and a man comes out of a place like that with the soft parts scarred over." "I don't need them to grow back overnight," Harry said. "I spent 13 years where there was nothing soft either. We can be bad at it together. That's still more than I had a year ago. A year ago I had no one to be bad at anything with." Remus had come down quietly behind them and stood a little apart, the way he always stood a little apart, the man who had spent his whole life being the one you don't quite let all the way in, and Sirius saw him, and reached out one arm without letting go of Harry with the other, and pulled the last living marauder into it, into the daylight, into the after none of them had planned for. "You too, Moony," Sirius said rough. "You don't get to stand off to the side anymore. We did that all those years, and look where it got us. The pack's down to 3. He looked between them, the werewolf and the sun, the 2 people left in the world who had loved James Potter and lived. So we're going to be a small, bad, clumsy pack, the 3 of us and a girl too clever for any of our good, and we're going to learn the ordinary part together if it kills us, which, knowing this family, it might." And they stood like that a moment in the emptying chamber in the plain afternoon light, and it was not, Harry thought, an ending. It was the thing he had never had and had stopped letting himself want. It was a beginning in daylight with no one chasing them, for the first time in any of their lives. It was Lucius Malfoy's misfortune that the trial Hermione had won began the same afternoon, while the chamber was still seated and still shaken, because it meant the man had no time to rebuild the ruin of his morning before the rest of it came down. Sirius Black stood trial at last. He stood it as himself, gaunt and gray and 13 years overdue, with his son in the gallery and the dog put away forever, and they gave him the Veritasrum he demanded, because a man who has spent 12 years unable to prove his own innocence does not wait to be offered the truth. He seizes it, and under it he told the chamber the thing no court had ever sat to hear, that he had not been the Potter's secret keeper. That he had persuaded James to switch to Peter at the last hour precisely because no one would suspect weak little Peter, and that the cleverness of it had killed his best friend and cost him everything. That Peter Pettigrew was alive, an unregistered animagus, a rat, and had been a rat in a Hogwarts dormitory for 12 years while Sirius rotted for his crime. In the chamber leaning forward now, the truth serum making it undeniable, that the boy in the gallery was his son, born of a rite of concealment sworn in love and desperation in the last black year of the war, hidden to keep the last black heir alive. It was the Basin's record made flesh. And when Hermione laid the goblin's record before the court alongside it, and the memory of the shrieking shack drawn into a pensive for the whole chamber to watch Pettigrew unfolding from a rat, gibbering his confession in the moonlight, there was nothing left of the official story but the smoking ruin of a thing the ministry had been too proud and too hurried to ever properly examine. And then Tonks, Junior or Very Junior, stood up with 6 bound men in the ministry's holding cells and a chain of 3 transfers and a date, and told the chamber, with her badge on the table, that the petitioner's wife had visited Azkaban the day before assassins were hired to maim a witness in this very case. She was careful, she did not say Lucius Malfoy hired them, because she could not prove the last inch and would not be caught overreaching. She only laid the facts on the table and let a chamber full of suspicious clever people draw the line themselves, and they drew it. Harry watched the precise moment Lucius Malfoy's standing in that room died, not with an accusation he could fight, but with a silence he could not. Sirius Black was acquitted of every charge before the sun went down. The Wizengamot did it grudgingly to save its own face as much as to free an innocent man, but it did it fully and on the record, and it ordered the recapture of Peter Pettigrew, and it restored to Sirius Black his name, his freedom, and his place as lord of the most ancient and noble house of Black. Lucius Malfoy left the chamber a much smaller man than he had entered it. He paused once beside the gallery rail and looked at Harry with his empty pale eyes. "This is not finished," he said very quietly for Harry alone. "No," Harry agreed, "but you are, for now." He held the pale gaze and did not blink because he was the heir of an ancient and noble house with the voice of it in his throat and a father walking free behind him. "Go home, Mr. Malfoy, we know where you live. The difference is that now the whole Wizengamot knows what you'll do to get what you want, and a man everyone is watching is a very poor sort of danger. Give my regards to your son. Tell him the half-blood fraud says the seat's spoken for." Lucius Malfoy went white, and then he went. They caught Pettigrew 11 days later in a barn in Yorkshire, hungry and shivering and weeping, and he confessed everything a second time under serum, and the last thread of the lie that had cost Sirius Black 13 years was finally, completely cut. Harry did not go to watch it. The thing he had wanted was never Pettigrew's punishment but his father's freedom, and he had that, and the rest was only tidying. The Minister for Magic had come to the hearing to be seen attending a tidy redistribution of a dead family's wealth, and had instead watched an escaped convict revealed in open court, a half-blood proven heir of the senior line, a muggle-born girl outlawyer the cleverest man in the room, and the deep magic of a 1,000-year house rise through the floor of his own ministry to render a judgment no statute he had ever signed could touch. Cornelius Fudge did the only thing a man like Fudge could do, which was to get on the right side of it as fast as his dignity allowed, coming down onto the floor while the cold still drained from the stone, shaking Harry's hand, shaking Sirius's with the particular warmth of a man who had just remembered very loudly that he'd always had doubts about the original sentence. announcing to the watching chamber and the fast-scribbling reporter from the prophet that the ministry would of course move at once to correct the grave historic injustice done to Lord Black. "Let him have the credit," Hermione murmured at Harry's shoulder, watching Fudge beam for the quill. "The story that walks out of this room today is the story the whole country believes by breakfast. Sirius Black, innocent, wrongly imprisoned, his name restored. Let Fudge be the hero of it if he likes. The more loudly he tells it, the harder it is for anyone ever to untell. We're not just winning the room, we're winning the morning paper, and the morning paper is where houses are made safe or unmade for good." By the time the Prophet's evening edition reached every owl in Britain, the House of Black was not a scandal or a usurpation. It was a triumph, a stolen heir restored, a father freed, an ancient house brought back from the dead, and a house the whole country has decided to love is the hardest thing in the world for an enemy to move against. Sirius Black was confirmed Lord of the most ancient and noble House of Black on a clear cold morning a fortnight after, and he did it the only way a marauder could, which was to turn the most solemn occasion in the history of the family into something his mother's portrait would have died of a second time to witness. He held it in the deep gallery before the core atrium, and gathered the whole impossible patchwork of them around the shining black heart. Harry his son, his heir; Hermione his son's bonded lady; Andromeda restored to the tree in gold; Tonks tripping over the hem of formal robes she clearly rescented; Remus Lupin cleared at last of the suspicion that had clung to him for harboring a fugitive; and Creature, the wretched old elf, standing now in a clean pillowcase he had asked Hermione's leave to wear. "I owe you the truth, Harry, before your father takes this," Remus said quietly, while the green fire was being lit. "I suspected, about you, about the right. James was my friend. I knew the shape of what the withering took from him, and I knew what kind of men we were, what we'd have done for each other in that war. After they died, I wondered whether the boy might be more than James's. And I said nothing for 13 years because saying it would have meant explaining how I guessed, and that would have meant admitting I'd been the one marauder not asked to be part of it, the werewolf, the one you don't trust with a child's safekeeping." He looked at Harry unflinching. "That was cowardice, and it cost your father years. I'll spend the rest of mine making it right if you'll let me. I knew your parents better than anyone left alive. I can give you them at least." "Then stay," Harry said, "and tell me about them. All of it. That's all I've ever wanted from any of you, to be told." And Remus Lupin bowed his head and stayed. It was Creature, though, who undid them all, because when Sirius reached the part of the old rite where the Lord names the houses faithful, the elf crept forward without being called, and bowed his ruined face to the black stone, and spoke the thing 200 years of cruelty had forbidden him to say. "Creature served Mistress because Mistress was his blood," he said, not looking up. "Creature hated because hating was what the house taught him for worth, and the young lady told Creature he had had enough of being told what he was worth by people who were wrong, and Creature has thought about it every night, and Creature finds he would rather serve a house that is faithful than a house that is pure." The bloodshot eyes came up, swimming. "Master Regulus tried to do one good thing with this house at the end, and it killed him, and no one ever knew, and Creature has carried it 15 years. But the house is faithful now, so Creature will be too. Towger's fidel. Creature keeps the new word. Creature keeps it for Master Regulus, who would have liked these ones." And he bowed lower, and Hermione, who did not cry in front of people if she could possibly help it, had to look very hard at the green fire for a moment. "I have spent most of my life," Sirius told them all when he could speak, "running away from this house, from this name, from everything it stood for, which was cruelty and pride, and the lie that blood is worth more than the people who carry it. I'd have burned the whole place down if I'd had a match in an afternoon. And then my son and a muggle-born girl who is far too clever for any of our good walked into the worst house in Britain and did the one thing no Black in 1,000 years ever managed. They didn't burn it down, they made it worth keeping." He laid his hand against the cold black seat, and the green fire flared the length of the gallery. "So I'll take the title, Lord Black, because somebody has to hold the door for these two until they're old enough to hold it themselves. But I take it under the new word, not the old, not Towger's purr." He looked up at the motto, the old gold and the new, hanging together on the tapestry where Hermione had stitched the second line. Towger's fidel. "Always faithful to the ones who stay. To the ones who stay," they said, all of them, even Creature, and the heart of the House of Black turned bright and whole in its seat, and held. Sirius came for Harry himself on the morning the guardianship paperwork cleared, which was the part Harry had not let himself expect, because expecting things had always been the surest way of not getting them. He came up the front path of number 4, Privet Drive, the front path in daylight, a free man under his own name, lord of an ancient and noble house, and knocked on the door of the most ordinary house in England. And when Vernon Dursley opened it and began to swell into the particular purple of a man about to shout about freaks on his doorstep, Sirius Black smiled at him, and said nothing at all, and the smile did the work. Harry came down the stairs with his trunk already packed, because he had packed it the night the basin spoke and had been carrying it in his head ever since. "You're not coming back," Sirius said. It was not a question. He had sworn it in the dark under a willow tree before he had even been sure he was allowed to be Harry's father, and he was a man who kept the things he swore. Not ever, you have a home. It was just buried under London and run by a screaming portrait, which, I grant you, is not most people's idea of an improvement on Surrey, but it's yours, and there's a father in it, a real one in the daylight who's allowed to know you're his. Harry did not have words for that, so he did the thing he had learned to do instead, which was to cross the distance himself. On the train back to the world that had a place for him in it, with the trunk between them and Hedwig asleep in her cage, Sirius reached into his robes and took out a thing he had carried. He said, since the night they swore the right, a small, flat photograph, creased soft at the corners from 13 years of being held. It was James and Lily, young and laughing, and between them a third man with gray eyes and black hair and a face that had never known Azkaban, his arm around James's shoulders. All three turned toward the camera and toward each other, mid-laugh alive. That's the night we decided, Sirius said quietly. About you, before you were anything but an idea the three of us were brave enough or mad enough to have. James kept it. It was in his pocket afterward when they let me collect what was left of his things. Before they took me, I took this. I wasn't allowed to know why it mattered so much. The right saw to that. I just knew I'd rather have died than let it go. He looked at the photograph in his son's hands. 3 people loved you into the world before you were born, Harry. 2 of them aren't here to tell you so I'm telling you for all 3 of us. You were never an accident, and you were never alone, even in the cupboard, even in the cold. You just couldn't see the people who'd already decided to love you. Now you can. Keep the picture. It's the oldest true thing the House of Black has got. Harry held it the whole way home, and he did not let it go, and for once in his life he did not have to. Later, much later, when the others had gone up to Emil, Creature had been threatening for 3 days, and the gallery was quiet, and the green fire burned low and steady in the brackets. Harry and Hermione stayed behind a moment at the foot of the seat, because some things are too large to be left without a witness, and they had long since become each other's. I keep waiting, Hermione said, her shoulder against his, the bond humming low and warm between them, to feel like I cheated my way in. Like someone's going to come and tell me the magic made a mistake and I have to leave. I spent my whole life afraid I'd never belong anywhere, and the place I ended up belonging is the one house in the country built, stone by stone, to keep people like me out. They did come and tell you that, Harry said. Malfoy, Narcissa, Bellatrix's knife, half the Wisengamot, everyone who could possibly tell you that you didn't belong stood up and told you in the loudest room in Britain, and the house chose you anyway. In court, against the purest blood in the country. He took her hand, palm up, the choosing left to her, the way it always would be. There's no version of this where you cheated your way in, Hermione. You're the only person in 1,000 years this house ever chose, with the whole world watching and the whole world objecting. That's not the back door. That's the front in daylight with everyone screaming, and the house held it open for you anyway. Hermione put her hand in his and let herself keep it there. It's not over, you know, she said. The way she said a sum was correct. Malfoy's not finished. Men like him only go quiet and wait, and there are things out there worse than Malfoy. The dark your father fought, the war that made all of this. I don't think it's as dead as everyone wants to believe. I think the hard part might be ahead of us, not behind. Almost certainly, Harry said, knowing our luck. He looked at the heart, at the thing that had reached into his blood across half of England in the summer and called him home, and he found that he was not afraid, or that the fear had become a thing he could carry, which was the only kind of courage he had ever known. A year ago, the largest fact of my life was that I was alone. That whatever came, I'd face it by myself, because there was no one, not all the way down, who'd walk into the dark beside me and stay. That's not the largest fact anymore. It hasn't been since the summer, and it's never going to be again. He smiled, and it was a real one, the kind that had been rare in him once and was getting less rare every day. So whatever's ahead, bring it. We're the House of Black now. We've got a father and a family and a name they can't burn off the tree. And we've got the one thing this house never had in 1,000 years of being the most powerful family in Britain. Someone worth its name, Hermione said, because she always knew. 2 of us, actually. He squeezed her hand. Come on, Creature'll never forgive us if the soup goes cold. And the heir of the most ancient and noble House of Black and his bonded lady walked up out of the deep gallery together, hand in hand, into the light and the warmth and the noise of a family at a table. And behind them the core Atrum turned slow and bright and whole in its seat, no longer dying, no longer alone, kept at last, and content in the patient way of old things to keep them in return. Above them on the great tapestry, the new word held beside the old, gold on green for anyone who cared to read it. Taugers pur, Taugers fidel, always faithful to the ones who stay. Chapter 7 end.